Chapter 1923. With the 11th prince's support, Zhang Yan's plan was on the right track. He no longer had to worry about the heavenly court's attitude. If the heavenly monarch was unwilling to follow the rules set by the heavenly court, then he and Quan Dao would not be so nice to him. At most, someone else would be the next heavenly monarch. It all depended on the heavenly monarch's response. Yi Guang was ordered to escort Haoneng down the mountain and back to Yanlu Kingdom. Then, he summoned Xiuguang and Qingguang and instructed them, the 11th prince must have someone protecting him. From now on, the two of you must not leave his side for even a second. Both Xiuguang and Qingguang responded solemnly. Yi Guang took out 2 treasures and handed them over. These are the treasures given to you by our ancestors. At this crucial moment, your safety is our top priority. After giving the instructions, he said to Haoneng, Prince, I will be leaving for a few days. If you have any requests, you can ask my 2 junior brothers. Haoneng asked, May I know where you are going? Yi Guang smiled. I am going to find a safe place for you. Now that the 2nd prince was dead, the 3rd prince would be his next opponent. Although the Yanlu kingdom did not have any conflicts with them, once De Dao was banished, there would be a winner and loser. The 3rd prince had millions of demon soldiers under his command and Quan Dao behind him. His advantage was not small. Even if the Yanlu kingdom had many Qi practitioners, it would not be easy to deal with him. Thus, he needed more help. In a large tent in the Xing Tai continent, the Jiao king, Kanji king, and the Jiao king, Hu Chao, were drinking and chatting. The 2 demon kings had originally agreed to side with each other, but now that the 2nd prince had been defeated and the 11th prince did not accept any demon soldiers, they could only follow the 3rd prince. However, they thought that this was a good choice. In the Battle of Xing Tai continent, the 3rd prince, Hao Chang, had occupied the little Qingyang palace and gained the most benefits. He could easily raise 1,000,000 soldiers. On the other hand, the other prince had occupied a few insignificant places and did nothing else. Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, the 3rd prince had a higher chance of becoming the emperor than the 11th prince. At that time, they would be able to ascend the throne together with him. Now that the 2 of them had joined forces, they had secretly recruited quite a number of useful demon generals. Together with the soldiers they had implicated, 40% of the 1,000,000 soldiers were under their control, and they had formed a force. If they had any thoughts of betrayal, they could immediately cause this army to collapse. The 3rd prince did not know about this, but even if he knew, he would not care about such petty tricks. Because in his eyes, demon soldiers were like rags that could be used and discarded at will. As long as he had wealth in his hands, he could always recruit them again if he lost them. There was nothing to regret. He had never counted on the loyalty of demons. Moreover, in terms of opponents, the 11th prince was the only one left. The 11th prince was in dire need of wealth. Even if he gave the 1,000,000 demon soldiers to the 11th prince, he would not be able to raise them. Therefore, there was nothing to worry about. Just as the 2 demon kings were exchanging wine cups, the curtains of the tent fluttered, and a Taoist walked in. He stood there with a smile and said, The 2 of you are in a good mood. Why don't you invite I for a drink? When Kenji and Hu Chao saw this Taoist, they froze, and the wine cups in their hands involuntarily fell to the ground. They kowtowed and shouted, Greetings, true immortal. Yi Guang said, Oh. You've seen I before. The Flood Dragon King, Hu Chao, replied, The 3rd prince once sent a portrait of the immortals of the Li Wang mountain and told us to be careful. If we see them, we can avoid them as soon as possible. That's why I remember. Yi Guang smiled and said, This 3rd prince is really considerate. The Flood Dragon King, Hu Chao, carefully raised his head and said, Immortal, are you here for something? Even though they were commanding thousands of soldiers, they were nothing in front of a true immortal. A simple Dao technique could take their lives. Therefore, they pretended to be cooperative. Yi Guang sighed and said, Sigh, I have traveled the world, but I still lack the strength to walk. It's really difficult. When the 2 heard this, they almost blurted out the words, I'm willing to do it. Although they said that they wanted to be the rulers of the country, even if they established a country, they would still have to submit to the heavenly court. If the heavenly court felt that they were an eyesore, a decree would be sent down and everything that they had planned would vanish like smoke in thin air. However, if they were involved with the Grand Supreme, it would be a different story. So what if it was the heavenly court? So what if it was a Star Lord? It sounded humiliating to be a mount, but this was a person they were close to, unlike those who only relied on them in name. In the past, they could not find a way to climb up. If there was a way, they would squeeze their way in. Now that it was right in front of them, how could they not grab hold of it? The Flood Dragon King looked at them and said, "Immortal, do you think the two of us are suitable?" Yi Guang looked at them, grunted, and nodded, saying, "They barely make it." The two of them were overjoyed and immediately bowed. "Greetings, Master." Yi Guang said, "Get up." The two of them did not dare and continued to lie there. Seeing this, Yi Guang let them be. The Flood Dragon King, Hu Chao, carefully asked, "Should I follow Master back to the mountain now, or should I go somewhere else?" Yi Guang said, "I still have something for the two of you to do. For the time being, you can stay here and wait for my orders." The two of them did not dare to ask anything, but they knew that this person was supported by the 11th prince. Therefore, if he stayed with the 3rd prince, he would most likely be a spy. In the past, they might have had to think about it. But now that they were under the Grand Sect, what could the 3rd prince do to them? Yi Guang nodded. "Then wait here and wait for my orders." The two of them quickly bowed and agreed. Yi Guang gave them a few more instructions and left the place. He was only here for a while. If the 3rd prince were to rely on these demon soldiers to attack him in the future, he could make use of these two to destroy the demon soldiers in an instant. Even if he were to recruit new soldiers, it would take some time. This period of time was enough for him to do many things. After leaving the place, he calculated with his fingers. With a thought, he landed in a majestic mountain range surrounded by celestial clouds. In the past, Liwang Mountain had driven away some spiritual birds and beasts. After all, this generation had listened to Taoism in front of the Taishang sect. Soon, they became successful. Now that they had settled here, it was time for this chess piece to be used. Once he appeared, more than 10 rays of light came over and turned into human forms. They bowed and greeted him. Yi Guang said, "Today, I need you to do something." One of the spiritual beasts that turned into an elder said respectfully, "Immortal Master, please give us your orders." Yi Guang said, "All of you, listen carefully. If the 3rd prince, Hao Chang, sends out an edict to recruit demons in the future, all of you can go and join him. However, I believe that he will be very cautious this time. Perhaps he will ask all of you to sign a talisman contract. These talismans will be given to all of you, and you can take his place." As he spoke, he flicked his sleeves and dozens of spiritual lights flew down and entered everyone's body. The elder said loudly, "Immortal Master, don't worry. We are from the Liwang Mountain. We will do our best to fulfill your orders." Yi Guang nodded slowly. "If you put your heart into it, I will give you a chance." In the Liwang Mountain, a cultivator was flying in from the sky. He was ordered by Zhang Yan to go to the heaven court and pressure the heaven monarch along with Quan Dao. He only returned to the mountain yesterday after he received an accurate reply. As soon as the conveyance light landed on the ground, he headed for the Dao Palace. After a brief report, he was summoned into the hall. When he saw Zhang Yan, he bowed and said, "Greetings, ancestral master." "The heavenly monarch has replied." Zhang Yan asked, "What did the Hao clan say?" The cultivator replied, "The heavenly monarch said that since the princes haven't decided on a winner yet, it is not appropriate for him to speak now." Zhang Yan smiled. This heaven monarch really knows how to evade. What he meant was that the 11th prince and the 3rd prince haven't decided on a winner yet, so he couldn't make a decision either. The logic was good, but this was actually to provoke him and Quan Dao to decide on a winner first. However, before De Dao truly retreated, he and Quan Dao wouldn't do such a thing. Moreover, the heaven monarch still had a vague response in this situation. He didn't want to make a clear statement, not to mention after the battle between the Liwang Mountain and Quan Dao. Zhang Yan asked a few more questions and ordered the cultivator to leave. He had already made an agreement with the two Taisheng before that if the Celestial Emperor still couldn't decide on a successor after half a year, then he would make a move to abolish the Celestial Emperor, but at that time, the Dao would definitely come forward to stop them. His eyes flashed. This was also what he wanted. He would first attack the Dao and then deal with Quan Dao. Once he got rid of these spirit cultivation Weili, his plan would be complete. In the ZK mountain, Ji Yu and the other two were also discussing about the throne. Ji Yu said, "The ancestral master said that he agreed with us. He will support the 14th prince to become the emperor. Now that the Dao is the righteous sect, as long as the prince they support doesn't lean towards Quan Dao or Liwang Mountain, once he ascends to the throne, he will follow the rules set by the previous imperial emperor. Especially when the heaven monarch doesn't die when he abdicates, he only retreats to the heaven nurturing palace to cultivate. The Dao techniques that he practices are also given by the Dao. When the throne changes, he might stand on their side." However, by doing this, they were planning to overturn the promise that they made for the disciples to fight for the throne. After Quan Dao knows about this, he will definitely not give in and will most likely fight with them. Ji Cheng said, "At most, we will fight with Quan Dao again. However, the incident with the second prince must not happen again." Ji Xing said, "I will personally go to the heavens and protect him." After a pause, he said to Ji Yu, "Senior martial brother, Yin Kuang is very dangerous. We cannot let him do as he pleases. We must capture him." Ji Yu shook his head and said, "The ancestral master once said that after the heavenly talisman is handed over to the heavens, it will not be tainted by the karma of this item. We can't capture him alone. However, there are still celestial lords in the heavens. With his strength alone, he won't be able to enter. I'm afraid that he will conspire with Quan Dao and it will be difficult to deal with him." Ji Cheng thought for a while and said, "If that's the case, we can first stabilize this person." He whispered a few words to Ji Yu. After listening, Ji Yu nodded and said, "That's a good idea. Let's arrange it this way." Chapter 1924. After Yin Kuang returned to the mortal realm, he did not return to his original residence. Instead, he chose to settle down on a desolate snowy plain in the extreme west of the great Zhou dynasty. Although the celestial lords retreated last time, it was hard to say when they would return. Thus, he did not make any contact with his two disciples. From this moment onwards, he would cut off his past and deal with the celestial court's encirclement by himself. On this day, he was sitting cross-legged on the plains, quietly adjusting his breathing. Suddenly, a ray of spiritual light fell from the sky, and the direction it landed was exactly where he was. He opened his eyes but did not get up because the other party's chi was calm and did not have a trace of murderous intent. That spiritual light fell to the ground in a flash, but it didn't make any movement. When it dispersed, a white-haired old man wearing a deep collar shirt appeared. He didn't wear a crown on his head, and he had a kind and benevolent countenance. He smiled and cupped his hands together, saying, "How has the left imperial advisor been?" Yin Kuang was surprised when he saw the newcomer, Star Official. This Star Official was originally an itinerant immortal. After entering the celestial court, he was only given an empty position. However, he was a good talker and had a good reputation. He was a frequent guest of the celestial court's banquets and had a good relationship with the immortal officials of the Hao and Shao families. The Star Official smiled and said, "Yes, I am." Yin Kuang thought for a moment and said, "Did the celestial court send you as a mediator?" As the imperial advisor's he was familiar with the celestial court's way of doing things. This person's arrival was undoubtedly a signal that the celestial court wanted to make peace with him. Thinking of the celestial lord's sudden retreat last time, he guessed that the celestial court must have encountered some trouble or they would not have made such a compromise. The Star Official smiled bitterly and said, "Imperial advisors you overestimate me. You have a strong will and determination that cannot be compared to ordinary people. I'm afraid I can't do anything to you with my glib tongue. He knew that the person in front of him was not someone who could be easily fooled. If he beat around the bush, he would not be happy. So, he might as well say it directly. Hence, he directly stated his purpose of coming. This time, I have come under the orders of the Sky Emperor to mediate peace. If Imperial Advisors is willing to give up now and not make things difficult for the Sky Court, then all the previous mistakes can be forgiven. He said earnestly, Imperial Advisors you know His Majesty's temperament. In Kwang said indifferently, oh. You can let bygones be bygones for killing the Emperor's son. The star official nodded and said, of course. In Kwang gazed into the distance and said, the Imperial family is heartless. With the current Emperor's temperament, this Ing doesn't find it strange at all to issue such an edict. It's just that Heavenly Mother's son has been killed. Are you going to let this Ing go? The master of the Heavenly Court was the Hao clan, but the Hua clan was equally important. They represented a part of the will of the Heavenly Court. If this person refused to let them off, the Imperial Edict of the Heavenly Court might not be able to protect them. The star official said, if Imperial Advisors is still worried, here is something else. He extended his hand and took out a talisman. In Kwang's expression changed when he saw it. He said in a low voice, the Grand Supreme's pardon. The star official said, this is the Grand Supreme's pardon. As long as Imperial Advisors agrees to stay out of this and not interfere in the fight for the throne, then you can take this. In Kwang thought for a while and suddenly raised his head. His eyes were shining as he looked at the star official and said, is His Majesty going to appoint the 14th prince as his successor? The star official's expression froze. He coughed and shook his head. This is not something I can ask. In Kwang did not ask further. But from the other's intentional reaction, he knew that he had guessed correctly. He had seen the 14th prince before. He was more intelligent than the other princes and was favored by Celestial Emperor. There was a rumor that the 11th prince was favored by Celestial Emperor. In Kwang was Celestial Emperor's personal attendant at that time, but he knew that was not the case. Celestial Emperor had purposely put on an act to protect the 14th prince. It could be said that the 11th prince was targeted by many princes and immortal officials and was even banished to the lower realm. In fact, it was all because of the 14th prince, and the 11th prince was not aware of it at the time. With this knowledge, In Kwang was able to sort out his thoughts. It was probably because he had killed the second prince, and it seemed like he was going against the Tian family. Celestial Emperor wanted to prevent In Kwang from killing another prince, so he took this step to calm him down. Thinking of this, In Kwang reached out and took the talisman. The star official was relieved when he saw In Kwang accept it. He smiled and said, with the virtue pardon, Imperial Advisors should be relieved, right? The person who held this pardon could be absolved of all past crimes, and the Heaven Court would not pursue the matter further. However, this person could no longer be an immortal official, and even his family members would be excluded. However, In Kwang had already rebelled against the Heaven Court and had no family members by his side, so he did not care about this. In Kwang did not comment. Who said that he could not continue to go against the Heaven Court with this talisman? He was not a pedantic person, and he respected using all means. Since the other party had taken the initiative to come to him, there was no reason for him not to use it. He could even numb the other party. The star official did not care what he did. In any case, he had completed his task this time, and whatever happened in the future had nothing to do with him. Hence, he bowed with a Dao salute, said a few polite words, and left. In Kwang thought about it and said, it seems that His Majesty has already decided to choose the 14th prince as the next emperor. Previously, the princes were fighting for the position on purpose to let these princes exhaust their own strength so that they could pave the way for the next one. He sneered a few times. This idea was not bad, but since he wanted to overthrow the Heaven Court and kill all the gods in the world, how could he let it go as he wished? In Yenlu country, the 11th prince received an edict from the Heaven Court at this moment. It was to summon him to the court for an audience. After he received the edict, he thought that the succession of the throne was going to be decided. At first, he was very excited, but after thinking about it again, he realized that something was wrong. After thinking deeply, he ordered someone to invite Yi Guang, who had already returned to the country, and asked him about this matter. After listening, Yi Guang said firmly, "This is the Celestial Emperor's plan. If the prince goes, there will be no chance of survival. You must not go." After hearing that, Haoning nodded to show that he understood. The Celestial Emperor must be up to no good to ask him to go now. Now that he was in the lower realm and had the protection of the Li Wang mountain, he was fine. If he returned to the heaven court, it would not be up to him. The Celestial Emperor could casually find an excuse to take him down. By then, how could he talk about inheriting the throne? But then, he frowned and said, "But if you don't go," Yi Guang continued, "the prince is not afraid that if you don't go, the Celestial Emperor can use this excuse to see the third prince and the crown prince as giving up on the opportunity to ascend the throne. Or, he can simply declare that the prince is disrespectful to the Celestial Emperor and take away the title of the crown prince." Haoning said, "Yes. Do you have a way to resolve this?" Yi Guang said, "This is an overt plot. Whether the prince goes or not, you cannot avoid it. However, the prince does not have to worry about this. If the Celestial Emperor is not willing to abide by the rules, then the Li Wang mountain will not be courteous to him. He will not be able to sit on the throne for long." At this moment, the third prince, Hao Cheng, also received an edict. However, he also saw through the situation and made the same choice as the 11th prince. However, contrary to their expectations, the Celestial Emperor did not reprimand them for their actions. It was as if the matter had passed just like that. In the blink of an eye, half a year passed. In the Dao Palace, Zhang Yan was sitting in meditation. Suddenly, he sensed something and knew that there was a result in the heavenly court. At this moment, a boy came to report that Wang Guang wanted to see him. He said, "Call him in." Wang Guang entered the palace and bowed, "Ancestral Master, just now, the Celestial Emperor has sent down an edict saying that the 14th prince is the next successor to the throne. At the same time, he also decreed that because the 3rd prince and the 11th prince disobeyed the Celestial Emperor's order, they will be stripped of their celestial titles and demoted to commoners, never to be pardoned." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I already know. I think the Celestial Emperor still has other arrangements. We need to be more prepared for the 11 princes, you should pay more attention to them." Wang Guang said seriously, "Disciple will remember." He bowed again and left. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. It seemed that the Celestial Emperor chose the Tao of virtue. However, he was not surprised by this result. The Celestial Emperor would either side with them or the Tao of virtue. There was no third path. The advantage of the Tao of virtue was that it was an orthodox sect. The heavenly court had been with them for a long time and they were familiar with each other. After the next prince ascended to the throne, there was no need to change anything. On the contrary, if Quan Dao became the orthodox sect, many things would have to be overturned and it would not be beneficial for the new Celestial Emperor to sit on the throne. The Celestial Emperor probably saw this and made such a decision. However, this way, Quan Dao would not act according to the rules of the past. He would fight with the Tao of virtue as he hoped. The Taoist on the left said, "The Celestial Emperor chose the 14th prince as the crown prince because his heart is determined to follow the Tao of virtue." However, the change of fate is not something that the Hao family can predict. "I will fight with the Tao of virtue to determine the position of the orthodox sect." The Taoist on the right looked at Zhang Yan and said, "What do you think?" Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. The changes of fate in this world finally happened according to his will. He looked at the two of them and said seriously, "Since I have formed an alliance with the two of you, I will take the position together with the two of you." In the Apricot continent, the 3rd prince Hao Cheng also knew that the Celestial Emperor had chosen the 14th prince as his successor. His face was gloomy and he said hatefully, "How can a Celestial Emperor go back on his words?" Yin Ming said at the side, since the celestial emperor has made a mistake, it is inappropriate for him to continue to sit on the throne. I, Quan Dao, will help your highness to ascend to the throne. Your highness need not worry about this. Hao Chang suppressed the hatred in his heart and returned to his usual calm self. However, he was still a little worried and asked, Daoist, are you confident? It was no wonder that he would ask such a question. The Tao of virtue had always been superior to Quan Dao. Otherwise, they would not have become the orthodox sect. Yin Ming said, Your Highness, don't worry. We did not fight with the Tao of virtue previously because there were 3 grand elders. This time, I have the Forgotten Mountain as an alliance, so we are well matched. Even if we can't take the Celestial Emperor's position, we can divide it and rule it. Chapter 1925. After Zhang Yan and Quan Dao, the 2 Taoists, came up with a plan. In order to declare that they were the orthodox sect, they ordered their disciples to draft an imperial edict, which listed the mistakes of the Heaven Emperor and the Hao and Xiao Tu families. Not long after the edict was issued, the 3 of them sensed it and immediately understood that their positions in the side hall of the heavenly court had been removed. Obviously, after the Heaven Emperor learned of this, he knew that there was no way to reconcile the 2 sides, so he completely sided with De Dao. The 3 of them were indifferent to this. The position in the side hall was just for show, but the heavenly court feared the Grand Supreme and did not dare to not do so. Now that they had fallen out, they did not expect the heavenly court to tolerate it. However, as long as they could support the prince they valued to inherit the throne and establish their own sect as the orthodox sect, then they could naturally be listed in the main hall. Therefore, this was only a small matter, and they did not need to care too much. However, to change the throne, they had to first overthrow De Dao. As for the 14th prince, he was not important at all. In this game involving the 3 Grand Supreme, he was not even a speck of dust. In the future, he could be dealt with by the new emperor. At this moment, the Daoist on the right pointed in the air, and a golden talisman immediately appeared and floated down. He made a gesture of invitation and said to Zhang Yan, The battle talisman is here, please take a look and see if there is anything wrong with it. Zhang Yan's gaze landed on the 2 of them. Quan Dao didn't intend to personally participate in the battle. They were only preparing to arrange for their disciples to compete with De Dao. The winner would be honored, and the loser would have to leave. Such a choice was understandable. Because once the Grand Supreme took action, it was very likely to cause the universe to collapse and all the heavens to disappear. If they did not want to recreate the world, then they had to do their best to avoid fighting. He raised his head and asked, If De Dao and De Dao do not accept this battle, what should we do? The 2 Grand Supreme fell silent. This was the last thing they wanted to see. If De Dao did not accept this battle, then things would become extremely troublesome. Of course, they could send their subordinates to attack the heavenly court, but De Dao could move them into Zeke Mountain. If it really came to that, unless the 2 of them personally took action, it would be impossible to break through that place. The key was that the celestial court still had something they wanted. If they didn't get the Emperor's seal, they wouldn't be recognized by the world. Even if they built another celestial court, it would be useless. The Daoist on the left asked, Does fellow Daoist have any ideas? Zhang Yan's gaze sharpened and he said, Now is not the time to talk about reason. We should go straight to the Purple Palace and change the universe. I have a treasure that can definitely appear in the world. If the 2 of you think it is possible, I will take it out. At that time, we can compete with Tao of virtue and there will be no need to worry. The 2 Grand Exalts remained silent. If there was such a treasure, then regardless of the mysteries behind it, it could at least withstand the combined strength of several Grand Exalts. However, at the same time, they also thought that since this treasure could be used for defense, could it be used for offense? Moreover, if it really had such power, the 2 of them might not be able to resist it. One should know that although they were allies with Zhang Yan now, they had no choice but to stand together because they had a common enemy. Once Tao of virtue was removed, they would be enemies again. Therefore, they were a little wary of this. The treasure that Zhang Yan mentioned was actually the shell of the Tai golden pearl. It was maintained by his own arcane energy. As long as he took it out, he could isolate the inside from the outside world. If he made a move, as long as he didn't go too far, he wouldn't have to worry about being discovered. However, if he did it all by himself, he might alarm the true body. If he could get the approval of the two Grand Exalts, then it would be very different. Because it was allowed by the two Grand Exalts, it wouldn't reveal the secrets of heaven. The Grand Exalts on the left thought for a long time and discussed with the other Grand Exalts in private for a while before saying, let's first send a letter to Tao of Virtue. If he doesn't accept it, then it won't be too late to carry out fellow Taoists' plan. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, let's do as the two Taoists say. He predicted that Tao of Virtue wouldn't be overthrown so easily. In the end, when the two Grand Exalts were at their wits' end, they would still return to their own path. After getting his approval, the two Grand Exalts immediately wrote a letter and sent it to Zeke Mountain with their arcane energy. Not long after, a reply flew over. The Taoist on the left took the letter, opened it, and said, the other side said that they are willing to fight with me for 3 rounds before talking about the rest. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. Tao of Virtue didn't mention anything about the outcome of the battle. It could be seen that they didn't have any sincerity and just wanted to delay it temporarily. However, the two Grand Exalts obviously didn't think so. They seemed to think that there was no need for Forgotten Mountain to intervene in this battle, so they immediately sent 3 disciples down the mountain to meet the appointment. In Zeke Mountain, the arranged battle was already known by Ji Lu and the others. Because this battle didn't involve the Grand Exalts, it was still decided by the 3 of them according to the previous arrangement. The 3 of them were very sure at this moment. Previously, they had fought with Forgotten Mountain and Quan Dao. In terms of cultivation and arcane energy, there was a limit to the difference between them. Although the 2 sects combined were slightly stronger than them, they didn't surpass them. It could be said that they were evenly matched, so the most likely outcome of this battle was that it would be difficult to determine the winner. Moreover, as long as the Ether sects fought, it was normal for there to be no winner for 3 to 5 years. Maybe it could drag on for tens or hundreds of years. By then, the situation would be different. However, because Tao of Virtue was the righteous sect, it would definitely be more advantageous to them. Ji Lu said, Quan Dao shouldn't be underestimated. In order to dispel their greed, this battle will be handled by me and the 2 junior martial brothers. Ji Lu could control life and ordinary things. Ji Lu then said, the reason why Quan Dao and Forgotten Mountain can compete with Tao of Virtue is because they have 2 princes in their hands. If they can be eliminated, they will have no more righteousness to rely on. Ji Chang said, Hao Chang and Hao Neng are both under the protection of Tao of Virtue and Forgotten Mountain. It won't be easy to take their lives. Ji Lu said, we have to try. Ji Xing thought for a while and said, maybe we can make Kwang do it. When Ji Lu heard this, he had an idea and said, Junior martial brother, what do you think? Why don't you tell me? Ji Xing said, the reason why Kwang killed the second prince was not because he hated our virtue, nor was it because he hated the Hao and Ho families. I think he hated the deity ruling the world, that's why he did this. Ji Lu nodded slowly, that makes sense. Ji Xing continued, since this person hates Hao clan, we can use him. If we can instigate him to kill Hao Chang and Hao Neng, it will save us a lot of effort. Moreover, this person has the heavenly talisman, so he will be a problem. Even if he fails and is killed by Forgotten Mountain or Quan Dao, it will still be a good thing. Ji Lu thought for a while and agreed, the 3 of us still have to deal with Quan Dao, so junior martial brother Ji Quan will do it. If he succeeds, it won't be a big deal. At the same time, Wang Guang also came to Yanlu Kingdom under Zhang Yan's order. This time, he brought a treasure from Forgotten Mountain. After inviting the 11th prince, he took out the treasure and threw it on the ground to make a cave. He pointed to the place and said, Prince, stay here for the night. If there is nothing important, don't come out. Hao Neng was surprised, Taoist, why do we have to do this? Wang Guang said solemnly, the 11th prince and the 3rd prince have been convicted by the celestial court. We can't guarantee that the celestial court won't use this as an excuse to punish you. Virtue and Taoism might be your opponent. Prince, you can only stay here to avoid it. Actually, if the Star Lords came, they were not afraid with them here. However, Hao Neng was a prince, and he was related to Heaven Emperor's bloodline. It was hard to guarantee that the celestial court didn't have any secret techniques that could be used against him. Only by hiding in the cave outside the seclusion would they be safe. Hao Neng also knew that this was a crucial time. His own matter was no longer a matter of one person, so he didn't insist. He followed everyone's advice and hid in the cave. Wang Guang saw him enter and calmed down. Even if someone of virtue and Taoism came to attack, he didn't have to worry. At this moment, he suddenly felt something in his heart. He realized that someone was calling him. After a little calculation, he knew the person's identity. He immediately moved to that place. He looked up and saw Ying Kuang standing not far away. He said, "Zui Yuzhong is calling I. Is there something?" Ying Kuang said in a deep voice, "Sorry to disturb Taoist. I might need to go to the celestial court, but I lack something to hide. Does Taoist have it?" After thinking about it for the past few days, he felt that the Star Lords were not only a threat to him, but also the celestial court's military force. If he could make a move first, he might be able to severely injure this person. Previously, he didn't think in this direction because he didn't think he could defeat the Star Lords. However, after the previous battle, he felt that he might be able to do it. However, it was difficult to hide his tracks when going to the void. He could use the heavenly talisman, but this item was deeply connected to the celestial court. Heaven Emperor might sense it, so he wanted to ask for help from Forgotten Li Mountain. After Dongguang understood his purpose, he thought for a while and said, "I do have something here." He took out a green leaf from his sleeve and handed it to Ying Kuang. This was what he used to hide himself when he explored the circling dragon palace. He wanted to hand it over after the matter was over, but Zhang Yan told him to keep it by his side. Now, he was giving it to Ying Kuang. Ying Kuang took it and put it away solemnly. Dongguang thought for a while and took out another item. He said, "Previously, I saw Zui Yuzhong fighting with the Star Lords. Although the heavenly talisman is strong, it can't last for long. I will give you another item." He flipped his hand and took out a triangular incense burner. He said, "This is the essence embryo burner. It has the ability to regenerate primordial essence. With this item to protect the foundation, I believe Zui Yuzhong can use it." Ying Kuang's expression flickered. He stretched out his hand and took it without hesitation. He tried to infuse his transcendence energy into it and instantly felt a wave of vitality spreading into his body. In an instant, he became spirited and energetic. He immediately praised, "What a good treasure." Then, he looked at Dongguang and cupped his hands. "I thank you. However, I may not have the chance to return this item to you." Wang Guang waved his hand and said, "I'll give this item to the Imperial Advisor, there's no need for you to thank me." He didn't hold back and said, "If you succeed, it will be beneficial to my generation. I wish you success." Chapter 1926. After bidding farewell to Ying Kuang, Dongguang returned to Yanlu Kingdom and decided to stay there. The safety of the 11th prince was of utmost importance. Even though he had left the cave abode behind to protect it, he still had to take precautions. If the 11th prince was killed, then all the preparations he had made would go down the drain. In order to prevent the Heavenly Court's possible attack, he and his fellow sect members set up a large restrictive array around the Yanlu Kingdom. Apart from this matter, he would come out once in a while to preach Tao. The main purpose of this was to improve the cultivation of the Qi practitioners under the 11th prince so that they could be used in the future. Many itinerant immortals who lived in other continents heard about this and felt that this was a rare opportunity, so they also came to listen to his preaching. In the end, even some of the Qi practitioners who served the third prince secretly came to listen to his preaching. Dongguang did not stop them. After all, the two factions were still allies in name, so there was no need to stop them. Moreover, after these people listened to his preaching, they might not necessarily side with him in the future, but they would form an invisible bond of karma. Who knows, they might need to use it one day. After 100 days passed, one day, when he was preaching Tao, he suddenly sensed something. He looked up into the sky and saw 2 rays of clear light flying into the sky. He recognized the 2 people. One was named Quan Jian, while the other was named De Dao Zhisheng. He guessed that the battle between the 2 parties had begun. After being informed by Zhang Yan, he understood that this battle would not determine the outcome of the battle. Thus, he was not interested in watching any longer. Just as he was about to return to his senses, the sky suddenly darkened and the stars in the sky suddenly lit up. His expression froze and he said, "Star Lord is descending." Just as he had guessed, in the blink of an eye, countless meteors fell from the sky and landed on the human world. If there were no accidents, this was the heavenly court's move. However, none of these meteors were heading towards the Yenlu kingdom. Instead, they were heading towards the Qingtai continent. It seemed like the heavenly court was placing more importance on the 3rd prince. Wang Guang didn't let his guard down because of this. Who knew if the heavenly court would create a diversion? Thus, he immediately called his fellow sect members over and ordered them to stand guard in case of any mishaps. Over at the apricot continent, 3rd Prince Hao Chang looked calm and composed on the surface, but his body was trembling slightly. After all, the might of the heavenly court's Star Lord was too great. Even with the protection of a perfected immortal, he could not completely dispel the fear in his heart. Moreover, there were 3 experts from the Quan Dao who were battling with De Dao in the Zik mountain, so the Celestial Emperor was obviously taking advantage of this gap to come and capture him. He took a deep breath and looked back at the Daoist standing behind him. "Daoist Runming? What do you think?" Daoist Runming replied calmly, "Don't worry, Your Highness. The so-called Star Lords are merely formed from the essence of the stars. They can only deal with the ordinary demons and cultivators from the lower realm. They might not even be able to get past the array formation set up by I. If Your Highness feels that something is wrong, you can hide in the eye of the array formation behind the palace." Hao Chang didn't listen to this. He believed that he was where everyone's morale was. No matter how afraid he was, he couldn't retreat so easily. Moreover, although this Daoist Runming was a little arrogant, his cultivation was impressive. Hao Chang was confident in his judgment. Just as the starlight was about to crash down, Daoist Runming lightly flicked his horsetail whisk. A circle of light rose above the small Qingyang palace. In a split second, clouds and smoke swirled around, forcefully restraining the starlight. One could see that the sky was shaking, the mountains were collapsing, and dust and smoke were billowing. But inside the palace, it was peaceful, not even the slightest tremor could be felt. At this moment, he finally had the time to look elsewhere. He saw that all the Star Lords were rushing towards him, but there was no movement from the Yenlu kingdom. He knew that he had helped his 11th brother block the calamity, and he couldn't help but snort. Right at this moment, the boundless starlight outside the formation dispersed, and then numerous enormous divine generals that blotted out the sky appeared in the sky. All of them held weapons in their hands, and one of the largest divine generals among them, who was dressed in golden armor, took a step forward. He held a golden hammer in his hands, and when he was about to raise it up high, he suddenly swung it down. Boom! This time, the little Qingyang palace shook as well. Runming was a little surprised and said, "Not bad." His eyes lit up. He stared for a moment and said, "I see. Is it because of the talisman of Tao of Virtue?" He turned around and said to the 3rd prince, "This time, there is Tao of Virtue involved, but I can still deal with it. To avoid being distracted, I hope Your Highness can retreat for now." Hao Chang didn't insist this time. Just now, that Star Lord's shocking attack didn't break the restriction, but it still made his spirit tremble. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, Daoist." Then, he turned around and retreated into the inner palace. As for the Yenlu kingdom, Dandy Guang didn't let his guard down. If the Star Lord's attack didn't go smoothly, it was possible that they would turn around and attack the Yenlu kingdom. At this moment, he felt a trace of disharmony. It was as if there was a flaw in something that was originally perfect, but he couldn't tell exactly where it was. He changed his mind and leaped up. He walked around the array and suddenly stopped at a certain spot. He blew a breath of clear air in that direction. Immediately, a ray of rainbow light flew up. However, before it could get far, the clear air caught up to it and it disappeared in an instant. Dandy Guang sneered. Just now, he saw clearly that it was a statue of a god. This should have been buried by the immortal official in the Yenlu kingdom. He didn't notice it before, so Tao of Virtue must have done something to deal with the 11th prince. After the array was activated, it was forced to reveal itself. It could be said that they had unintentionally gotten rid of a hidden danger. The Star Lord's descent caused quite a commotion. At this moment, Ying Kuang, who was far away in the great Zhou dynasty, also felt it. He took out the heavenly talisman and immediately saw the scene in the apricot continent. Through observation, he found that at least half of the Star Lords had descended. His eyes lit up. If he charged into the void now, he could catch the heavenly court off guard and even severely injure these Star Lords. He didn't act rashly. Instead, he calculated in his heart and thought that since these Star Lords had come out, it would be easy to retreat. If he really wanted to make a move, it would be best to wait until the other perfected immortals fought fiercely. Thus, he kept his cool and adjusted his aura, waiting for an opportunity. After a few days, he saw that the battle between the two sides was getting more and more intense. It was difficult to separate for a while, so he didn't hesitate and leaped up into the void. At the same time, he took out the green leaf he got from Dandy Guang and concealed himself. As expected, as he flew, no one discovered his tracks. With the help of the heavenly talisman, he entered the depths of the void in an instant. There were billions of starlight reflected on the walls of the void. Every star shone with boundless light. This was the sign of the young manifestation of the heavens and earth. It had existed since the beginning of time. Anyone with a weaker cultivation would be instantly swallowed up by the starlight. He had the heavenly talisman with him, so he wasn't afraid of this. With a thought, a golden talisman appeared behind him and hovered above his head. As he activated it, halos of light appeared. However, right at this moment, he felt a wave of uneasiness in his heart. Before he even had the time to check, he suddenly saw a large hand stretch out from the void and grab towards him. The fingers were slender and white as if they were carved from fine jade. Tao of Virtue's Grand Supreme. Ying Kuang was shocked. However, when he looked again, he realized that it was a setup left by the Grand Supreme. He suddenly realized something. Though Tao of Virtue's Grand Supreme said he wouldn't interfere with the heavenly talisman, if he came here on his own accord, then it wouldn't count as breaking his promise. Perhaps the Grand Supreme predicted that he would come here, so he set up this trap first. At this moment, thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind. Tao of Virtue's setup was something he could easily deduce with a little deduction. However, he didn't think about it beforehand. His mind must have been deceived. The heavenly talisman came from Tao of Virtue's Grand Supreme, so it was very likely that Tao of Virtue had hidden such a trick. If that was the case, did Heaven Ruler know about this? Was the reason why he was able to steal the heavenly talisman so easily? However, even if he understood all of this, he couldn't solve the crisis before him. In the face of the Grand Supreme's power, even with the heavenly talisman in hand, he had no power to resist. He could only watch the jade hand fall. Just as he was about to be grabbed, the green leaf floating in front of him suddenly bloomed with a five-colored brilliance and stopped the big hand. Then, the two collided and disappeared like smoke in the wind. At the same time, Ying Kuang found that he could move again. The green leaf floated down and fell into his hand. He understood that this time, it was the Grand Supreme of Mount Li Wang that helped him escape from this disaster. He bowed deeply in the direction of Mount Li Wang. In the nameless Dao Palace, Zhang Yan withdrew his gaze from Ying Kuang. At this moment, he was invited by two Grand Supreme of Taoism to wait here for the outcome of the battle with Tao of Virtue. The Taoist on the left suddenly said, "Fellow Taoist, just now, fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's just a small test." The Taoist nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Zhang Yan looked into the void again. The two disciples who were fighting were very similar in strength. It was impossible to determine the winner in a short period of time. He said, "The result of this battle will be 10 years later. If the next two battles are like this, it will be delayed for 30 years. If the 14th prince ascends the throne here, he will be able to stabilize the world in a few years. Once his name is established, it will not be easy to overthrow him." The Taoist on the right said in a low voice, "We will definitely not let this happen." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and didn't deny it. In his opinion, if they didn't personally participate in this battle was completely unnecessary. So what if Taoism won? They only had a slight advantage. It was impossible to force Tao of virtue to give in. Similarly, if Taoism was defeated, it was impossible for them to retreat. At this point, both parties had reached the point where they had to overturn the other party to become the winner. However, both parties were too restrained and were unwilling to take that last step. The reason for this was that the two parties didn't have an agreement that he didn't know about. Instead, they had not walked out of the shackles of the original battle. However, when this battle ended, both parties would not get the result they wanted. At that time, it would be impossible to ease the tension. Chapter 1927. In the Apricot continent, in the name of preventing the barrier from being broken, Run Daoist ordered a group of Qi practitioners who had pledged allegiance to the third prince to fight with the many celestial lords. These celestial lords all had sturdy bodies and armors forged by the heavenly court. Unless one's cultivation reached a certain level, it would be very difficult to shake their bodies with magic arts. Thus, it was very strenuous for them to fight. At this moment, a loose immortal dodged a celestial lord's hammer. Just as he was about to use his magic power to force the celestial lord back, he saw a shadow sweeping over. It was another celestial lord slashing at him with a sword. Moreover, there was a suction force on the sword, preventing him from escaping. His face immediately turned pale, and he knew that he had no chance of escaping. But at this moment, the celestial lord's body suddenly tilted, and the light in his eyes dimmed. Then, like a collapsing mountain, he fell heavily to the ground and shattered into pieces with a loud rumble. The loose immortal had no time to rejoice after escaping this calamity. He quickly flew into the sky and calmed himself down. When he looked down, he was greatly shocked. He saw the huge body surrounding the palace collapsing with a series of rumbling sounds. It looked like a mountain range collapsing. But what puzzled him was that these celestial lords were not attacked at all. At this moment, beams of light flew into the sky. It was the Qi practitioners who discovered this strange situation. They also left the circle and looked at this scene in amazement. When Taoist Run Ming saw this, his heart skipped a beat. He performed a hand seal and discovered that the sign was on the heavenly talisman. He immediately understood the reason. These star venerables were like this because their source of life had been destroyed. He looked around. Although many celestial lords were killed, there were still a large number of them left. But after this happened, they immediately showed signs of retreating. This was natural. Their source of life was being attacked. How could they have the heart to continue wasting time here? Run Ming sneered and immediately sent a message to the surroundings. He ordered all the cultivators on his side to charge out together and delay these celestial lords. After receiving his order, the minor Qingyang Palace's side immediately changed from a battle to a battle of attrition. If these stellar lords dared to turn back without a care for anything, then not many would be able to return safely. Run Ming saw that this was a promising plan and had another idea. He found a disciple and instructed, "Go to Yanlu country now and invite fellow Taoist of Mount Li Wang to kill the celestial heaven star lords. Go now." As he spoke, he shoved a message talisman into the disciple's hand. Then, using his qi, he teleported the disciple to the Yanlu kingdom. At this time, in Yanlu country, Wang Guang was afraid that De Dao still had some tricks up his sleeves due to the god statue incident. Thus, He personally patrolled around to see if there were any loopholes. As he was flying, he suddenly saw a Taoist outside the formation. Looking at his chi dynamic, he was a disciple of Quan Dao. He did not know why the Taoist was here at this moment. After thinking for a while, he sent a disciple to question him. The disciple quickly returned and said, "Martial uncle, that person claims to be a disciple of perfected immortal Run Ming. He is here under the order of this Taoist to invite me to attack the celestial heaven's star lords." He handed over a message talisman with both hands and said, "This person's token is here." Wang Guang took a look and made some calculations. After confirming that this person was indeed a disciple of Quan Dao, he thought that attacking the celestial heaven's star lords was worth it. If it was in the past, because the celestial heavens was the ruler of heaven and earth, Mount Li Wang would more or less give them some face. But now that both sides were ready to fight, there was no need to care about this. Not to mention, this person was a huge threat to the 11th prince. If they killed some of them, it would reduce the obstacles in the future. And if the celestial heavens did not have these martial forces to rely on, it would be much easier to deal with them in the future. Thus, he said, "Go and tell this person that I know about this. Since both sides are in an alliance, I will not let fellow Taoist fight the enemy alone." Quan Dao's disciple received an accurate reply, bowed, and left. Wang Guang made some arrangements and chose a disciple to go with him. He used a teleportation technique and in an instant, they were outside the little Qingyang palace. Run Guang saw him and jumped up to welcome him. Because the enemy had not left, they exchanged greetings and talked for a while before they separated to attack the celestial heaven's star lords. With the cooperation of both sides, the celestial heaven's star lords that descended to the mortal world to attack the apricot continent felt that they could not withstand it anymore. In addition, they were worried about the Foundation and did not have the heart to continue fighting. Thus, they had to give up a portion of the celestial heaven's star lords and the rest hurriedly returned to the void. The portion that was left behind was quickly wiped out. On the surface, this generation did not seem to have suffered a great loss because as long as the star essence was not destroyed, they could go back and change their bodies. However, these external objects needed to be reforged by the celestial heavens. Thus, they could solve the crisis of the Foundation being attacked. In a short period of time, there were not enough people to send out to find trouble with the two princes. At the same time, deep in the void, Yin Kuang used the power of the heavenly talisman to continuously kill the star essence. Every star essence destroyed was equivalent to the death of a celestial lord. There were billions of stars in the sky and it could be said to be endless. However, there were only a few celestial lords that ruled over the celestial heavens. Especially the original star essence that was entrusted with consciousness, it was not something that could be easily produced. If it was destroyed, it would not be able to recover in a relatively long period of time. Thus, his actions quickly attracted the celestial lords that were stationed here and they tried to stop him. Unfortunately, in the face of the heavenly talisman, even if these celestial lords came forward, they would be destroyed by the power of the talisman. They could not do anything to him. Previously, when he fought with the celestial lords, he was exhausted. Now that he had the cauldron that Wang Guang gave him, even if he was slightly tired, he only needed to use the cauldron to recover his strength. If there was no one to stop him, he could continue fighting endlessly. At this moment, in the celestial heavens, after Sky Emperor heard about this, he was abnormally angry. However, there was not much he could do about this. He quickly sent someone to Zeke Mountain to ask for help from a virtuous person. After Sky Emperor pleaded for him, Zhilu could not help but think about it. From the perspective of Zeke Mountain, if the celestial heavens had fewer celestial lords, they would be more reliant on the virtuous path. This would be beneficial to them. However, if there were no celestial lords to protect them, the celestial heavens would not be able to govern the universe, and the Hao family would not be able to stabilize their position as celestial emperor. The position of the virtuous path would also be meaningless. Thus, they had to step forward to help. Thus, they immediately sent people of the same generation that they could send to kill Yin Kuang. Not long after, the true figure of the virtuous path appeared in the depths of the void. Seeing the appearance of the virtuous path, Yin Kuang's expression froze. He knew that it was time for him to retreat. Perhaps because the heavenly talisman was personally refined by the virtuous path Grand Supreme, it had limited effect on these true immortals. At most, it could only be used to move them away and could not do anything to them. Moreover, every time it was used, there would be one less fairy book. It was not a wise move to fight them head-on. Even if he could really injure this person and make a big deal out of it, the Grand Supreme might really make a move. Thus, he did not hesitate and immediately used the heavenly talisman to return to the mortal realm. The virtuous path Grand Supreme had been instructed in advance that he only needed to drive Yin Kuang away and did not need to care about anything else. Thus, seeing that he had left, he did not chase after him. Yin Kuang returned to his original residence. He did not lie low here and began to think about the next step. Even though he did not kill all the Star Lords this time, he had indeed dealt a heavy blow to the celestial heavens, especially to the celestial heavens authority. The Star Lords were the celestial heavens' reliance to suppress the various worlds. It was also because of them that the gods of the various worlds could enjoy the tributes of the lower bound, and no one dared to disobey them. If something were to happen to them, then the rule of the lower bound would soon be unstable. However, the celestial heavens' accumulated authority was still there. Most people were probably watching and no one dared to rise up and overthrow the gods. Thus, he tried to light the first fire. He took out the talisman book and gathered all the Qi practitioners he secretly recruited. He said, "Now, the Hao clan has 2 princes outside and they do not listen to orders. The celestial heavens can't do anything about it. Now, the Hao clan is at odds with the Grand Supreme. Even if we have the help of the virtuous path, we have no time to care about other things. This is the time for us to pull ourselves together." After giving some detailed instructions, he ordered these people to split up and get ready to slaughter the gods in the great Zhou dynasty. This was also a test. After this, if the celestial heavens reacted strongly and sent another Star Lord down, then it meant that they still had the strength to care about the outside world. He would continue to wait for a while. If the celestial heavens pretended not to see anything, then he would try to make a bigger scene. In the next few months, he traveled all over the great Zhou dynasty and killed the gods without mercy. Perhaps it was because the Star Lord was too heavily injured, or perhaps they were afraid of the heavenly talisman in his hands, but this time, the celestial heavens did not make any moves. Seeing this scene, the people he had sent out earlier also began to move. Even though the commotion was not great in the beginning, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that if the heavenly court did not stop it in time, it would definitely spread until it could not be stopped. After a few months, the celestial heavens finally reacted. The celestial monarch issued an edict, ordering the Qi practitioners to protect the gods and kill those who did not submit. Those who contributed to the celestial heavens would be rewarded with an official position in the celestial heavens. For a long time, the celestial monarch had been trying to control the Qi practitioners. But now, he did not have the power to eliminate Yin Kuang and did not want to rely too much on the virtuous path. Thus, he could only open up this loophole. Although this would cause another bad consequence, it could not be denied. Indeed, there were many itinerant immortals who heard about this and went down the mountain to kill Yin Kuang's subordinates in exchange for an official position in the celestial heavens. The two sides fought fiercely. In addition, the gods all recruited monster soldiers to protect their lives. Suddenly, chaos broke out everywhere and the heavens were not at peace. Time passed and 30 years passed. The chaos in the heavens showed no signs of subsiding. As the gods continued to be killed, the celestial heavens' control over the lower realm became weaker and weaker. At this moment, outside the void, Zhi Lu cupped his hands and said to a Taoist opposite him, "Fellow Taoist Shang Ming, thank you for letting me win." The Taoist returned the greeting and silently retreated. The 3 battles between Quan Dao and De Dao had ended. Unexpectedly, the party who proposed to fight Quan Dao was the one who lost and none of them won. However, because both sides had their own thoughts and did not agree on what to do after the winner was decided, Quan Dao would never admit defeat. Seeing this, Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. Compared to Quan Dao winning, he actually hoped to see this result because it meant that other than accepting his proposal, Quan Dao had no other way out. Thus, he looked at the two and said, "Fellow Taoists, why don't you two reconsider my previous suggestion?" Chapter 1928. After Zhang Yan said this, Quan Dao and Quan Dao both fell silent. All of them knew that a direct fight with De Dao was indeed the most direct and effective method. However, they faintly felt that something was wrong in their hearts. It seemed that the moment they agreed, the situation would completely leave their control. Moreover, the might of the treasure that Zhang Yan had mentioned had caused them to be extremely vigilant and fearful. Moreover, they had lost all the battles, which showed how strong De Dao was. Who could guarantee that if they joined forces with Zhang Yan, they would definitely be able to defeat De Dao? After a while, the Grand Supreme on the left said, "If it was before, I would think that fellow Daoists' words were very reasonable, but now the situation has changed, and there is another way to seize the heavenly power." The Daoist on the right also said, "That's right. Although we lost in the battle, it is not impossible to win back from him." Zhang Yan immediately understood what these two meant. They saw that after the celestial lords were severely injured, the realms were in turmoil for the past 30 years, and the heavenly court was declining, so they planned to use the Thearcha's son to seize the heavenly power. There was a possibility of success, but he was not optimistic. Although the celestial lords had yet to recover, the heavenly court still had many immortal officials and many itinerant immortals, which was enough to calm the chaos. He knew that the two of them should have sensed something, which was why they were unwilling to accept his suggestion. However, he already had a plan, which was currently being set up. Once it was activated, whether it was the path of virtue or the path of integrity, they would have no choice but to take this final path. He said, "Since you two Taoists think this is feasible, then let's give it a try." However, the 11th prince only has a country under his rule, so he will not participate in this battle. Quan Dao and Quan Dao discussed with each other and agreed to this matter. They knew that this was a subtle indication that Zhang Yan did not agree with and was not optimistic about their action, but it did not matter. The 11th prince's power was indeed not big, and it did not matter if he was missing. Moreover, if they gave up this opportunity, if they could really attack the heavenly court in the future, this Thearcha's son would no longer have the ability to fight for the throne, which was a good thing for them. Furthermore, the two sects were allies after all. Even if they didn't intervene in this situation, De Dao would still have to use part of their strength for defense. In this way, they wouldn't be able to use their full strength to deal with them. Therefore, even if Forgottenly Mountain didn't intervene, they would still be able to restrain them. When Zhang Yan saw that the matter had been settled, he didn't have to stay here, so he bid farewell to the two of them right away and turned around to return to Forgotten Mountain. After he left, the two of them. He then drafted an imperial edict and ordered people to send it to the lower realms. Xingtai Continent, Little Qingyang Palace. Ever since Hao Chang forced the celestial lords to retreat, his reputation had soared. Over the past few decades, more and more people came to seek shelter from him. In particular, some of the heavenly court's immortal officials, who held great power, had secretly colluded with him. There were even calls in the heavenly court to depose the 14th prince and replace him with the 3rd prince. It was said that the 14th prince had made a few mistakes and had been criticized several times. It seemed like his position was a little unstable. Thus, during this period of time, he was full of ambition and thought that the day of his return to the heavenly court was not far away. On this day, Run Ming suddenly came to find him and said solemnly, "Your Highness, Patriarch has passed down an imperial edict." When Hao Chang heard that it was a rumor from Grand Elder, his expression tensed up and he hurriedly asked, "What did Grand Elder say?" Run Ming didn't say it directly and only muttered a few sentences. Hao Chang seemed to be frightened. He widened his eyes and looked at Run Ming, asking with a trembling voice, "Are we really going to do this?" Run Ming said, "Ruling the universe and being the venerable emperor, isn't that what your highness wants?" Hao Chang calmed his state of mind and said hesitantly, "But recently, royal father seems to have the intention to appoint me." Run Ming sneered, "This is just to numb your highness, could it be that your highness can't even see this?" I dare to say that when the situation stabilizes, the 14th prince will definitely ascend to the throne. At that time, your highness won't have a chance anymore. Hao Chang took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, the middle court is powerful, what should I do? Run Ming pointed to the sky and said, the stars are dim, the universe is restless, this is a good opportunity. Hao Chang subconsciously raised his head and saw that the stars in the sky were much dimmer and less complete. One must know that since ancient times, the stars in the sky had almost never changed, but now, they were missing and scattered, obviously not as good as before. It was indeed a good opportunity to attack the celestial court. However, as a prince, he was very clear of the celestial court's foundation, so he was still worried and said, but even if there are no star sovereigns in the court to help, the power they have is far greater than mine, this matter is still difficult. At this moment, Daoist Run Ming said, if your highness can persuade one person, this matter will be in the bag. Hao Chang asked for guidance, may I know who Daoist Run Ming is talking about? Run Ming said, the former left imperial censor of the celestial court, Ying Kuang. Ying Kuang. Hao Chang's expression changed. He already knew that the reason he was able to defeat the star sovereigns in one battle 30 years ago was because this person had killed his way into the depths of the void and destroyed the star essence everywhere. With his current strength, if he could get someone with the celestial talisman to serve him, there was indeed hope of defeating the celestial court. He asked, can this person be trusted? Run Ming replied, of course not, Ying Kuang seems to be hostile towards the gods, but there's no harm in it. As long as this person has the same interests as me, we can try to rope him in. When we defeat the celestial court, we can think of a way to deal with him. Hao Chang thought about it and felt that it was worth a try. The Hao gods only listened to celestial monarch's orders, so they had nothing to do with him now. If they didn't submit, they would be enemies. As for the Yun gods, he couldn't wait for Ying Kuang to kill them all. When he ruled the universe in the future, as long as he had the support of Quan Dao and the star sovereigns in his hands, his position would be unshakable. Thinking about this, he suddenly had an idea and couldn't help but ask, Daoist Run Ming, if we can get the celestial talisman. Run Ming shook his head and said, Your Highness, you don't have to think about it. Other than Grand Elder, no one else can get it, and we will offend him for no reason. Hao Chang gave up after Run Ming denied it. He frowned and said, that's strange, how did Ying Kuang steal this thing from the lower bound? Run Ming sneered, if it wasn't for De Dao's tricks, how could Ying Kuang get it so easily? He glanced at Hao Chang and said, Your Highness, if you really want to use this thing, you can ask the two patriarchs to refine another one after I get the offerings. Hao Chang was overjoyed when he heard this. Even with his shrewdness, he was slightly excited and said, is it really possible? Run Ming said, of course it's possible. Celestial Monarch naturally has a celestial talisman to display his authority. Speaking of which, your father has lost this thing, so his name is already unrighteous. Hao Chang nodded repeatedly and said, all right, I will send an envoy to convince Sui Yuzhong. Half a day later, an envoy came out from Little Qinyang Palace and headed towards Great Zhou's territory. Ying Kuang did not conceal his whereabouts, so it did not take the emissary long to find his residence. After reporting his identity, he was quickly led in without any trouble. The emissary and Ying Kuang could be considered old acquaintances. After they met, they exchanged a few pleasantries and explained the purpose of their visit. Ying Kuang said, oh. The third prince wants to recruit me. The envoy said, yes, your highness said that Zui Yuzhong wants nothing more than to expel the gods and overthrow the celestial court. Now that I have the same goal as your highness, why don't we work together? Ying Kuang didn't answer and said, envoy, you have come from afar, you can take a rest first. The envoy knew that he needed to weigh the pros and cons, so he bowed and retreated. Ying Kuang took out a talisman and sent it to the sky. Then, he waited quietly. After a few breaths, there was a sound coming from outside. The curtains of the tent fluttered even though there was no wind. Dongguang walked in and bowed, Zui Yuzhong invited I here, is there a problem? Ying Kuang stood up and bowed. He said in a deep voice, just now, the third prince is here to recruit me. Do you think I can accept it? He wasn't a pedantic person. If he could use the third prince's power to weaken the celestial court, he wouldn't mind joining forces with him. However, he was indebted to Dongguang for lending him a treasure previously. Moreover, his most valued disciple was under the protection of the Li Wang mountain. Therefore, he had to explain this matter to Dongguang. Dongguang smiled and said, "Since the third prince is sincerely inviting me, why don't I go and help him?" Yin Kuang looked over and said, "Aren't you afraid that the third prince will really overthrow the celestial court and take the throne?" Dongguang laughed and said, "If he can be pushed up so easily, then it won't be hard to pull him down in the future." Yin Kuang was deep in thought. After he sent Wang Guang away, he invited the envoy again and said that he had agreed to the third prince's invitation. However, at the same time, he brought up many harsh requirements. The envoy had obviously been informed before he came and agreed to all the conditions on the spot. Then, he invited Yin Kuang to draft a contract with him. Yin Kuang was also satisfied with this. No matter what happened in the future, at least there wouldn't be a problem for the two sides to join forces. Therefore, he set off on the same day and headed to the Qingtai continent with the envoy. Ever since Zhang Yan returned to the Li Wang mountain, he had been calculating the heavenly secrets and saw everything that Quan Dao had done. He snorted coldly. Quan Dao lost the duel and wanted to win it back from the other side. The two of them simply lacked the courage to stake everything on one throw. Quan Dao might even think that after this, the Tao of virtue would still be compatible and he could wait for the next change of the throne to find another opportunity. He thought to himself, if that's the case, then I'll find a way to force him to do it. The method he was thinking of was to use his true body to observe this world and create an illusion that the true body of the Tao of virtue was about to come over. If such a thing really happened, then the two of them wouldn't be able to resist it. After all, they were only a strand of consciousness and wouldn't be a match for the true body. Quan Dao was afraid that the Tao of virtue would get the item that the celestial court controlled, so he definitely wouldn't continue to compromise and would fight for it at all costs. Similarly, the Tao of virtue would definitely protect this item with all his strength. Once the Tao of virtue and virtue personally came over, he would achieve his goal. Speaking of which, he had this plan a long time ago. However, at that time, he didn't understand the qi dynamics of the two sides. He was afraid that if he wasn't careful, the Tao of virtue and virtue would discover the truth. But now, after observing the Tao of virtue and virtue for a long time, he more or less understood the changes in it. That was why he had the confidence to do this. At this moment, with a single thought from him, an inexplicable fluctuation appeared in the entire world. At this moment, both the Tao of virtue and the Tao of virtue and virtue felt a vast power descend. That feeling was clearly that one of their true bodies was about to descend into this world. Chapter 1929. The two Taisheng of Quan Dao sensed that there was a Weili who was not on their side coming and felt that something was wrong. The Taoist on the left said, "This is not in the future or the past. There is no doubt that a Taoist friend has left his body here. When he arrives, the item will definitely be taken away." The Taoist on the right pondered for a moment and said, "I don't know which one has arrived. Could it be the one from Mount Liwang?" The Taoist on the left shook his head and said, "The qi dynamic is different. It should not be the one from Mount Liwang, but someone from Tao of virtue." In his opinion, if any of the Taisheng came, the rest would not be able to resist, so there was no need to make any changes or cover up. But in fact, Zhang Yan made such a plan to prevent them from paying attention to him and hindering his plan. However, they did not know the real reason, so they came to the wrong conclusion. The Taoist on the right side, it is hard to avoid the battle with Mount Zeek this time. They had been avoiding a head-on confrontation with Tao of virtue. Other than the consideration of their strength, it was also because, as Zhang Yan had judged, they thought that there was still a chance of winning. Even if they lost, they could wait for the next round, and it was not the time for them to fight. But who would have thought that the situation would change so quickly that they were forced to fight to the death in the blink of an eye? The Taoist on the left said, "With just the two of us, we are still weaker than Mount Zeek. We still need to invite the one from Mount Li Wang to come here to have a chance of winning. The Taoist on the right nodded slowly. In the past, Tao of Virtue was able to suppress them because they had one more person. Because they knew that it was difficult to win in a head-on battle, they had been pursuing a roundabout strategy. But in the current situation, if they wanted to win, they had to rely on Zhang Yan. In Mount Li Wang, after Zhang Yan forced the Weili into the present world, he sat there quietly and waited. He believed that it would not take long for the two to come to him. Sure enough, in less than half a day, there were waves of mysterious sounds in the sky and auspicious clouds came from all over. He looked up and saw that it was the two Taisheng of Quan Dao who came to Mount Li Wang together. So he smiled and stood up to walk out of the Taoist palace. Wherever he passed, there was a flash of light, and the air was dense and auspicious. He cupped his hands in front of the door and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoists." The two of them solemnly returned the greeting. This time, they came together to visit Zhang Yan. First, it was to show their seriousness. Second, since they were going to personally fight, there was no need to be secretive and find an unknown place to discuss. At the same time, he announced to the Dao, and the three of them stood together. After the greetings, Zhang Yan invited the two of them to sit in the Holy Ji Palace. This time, other than him sitting in the host's seat, the two of them sat in the same seats as before. The Grand Elder on the left said, "I believe fellow Taoist has also sensed the changes in the world." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. The Grand Elder on the right said, "This is the arrival of a fellow Taoist of the Tao. If he falls in the present world, then all my efforts will be in vain. Now I can only fight with him. I wonder if fellow Taoist is willing to help me." Zhang Yan did not immediately agree, but said, "I have a question here. I wonder how the two of you will deal with the item after obtaining it." He was asking the two of them how the item would be distributed after defeating the Tao. This matter could be discussed after defeating the Tao, but he was only one person while there were two of them. If the two of them ignored him after obtaining the item, then it would be in vain. Even though everything would become meaningless after he arrived, he had to make this request, or rather, express this attitude. If he did not say anything, it would only make the two of them suspicious. The two of them had obviously discussed this matter before coming here. The Grand Elder on the left said, "The two of us have an agreement that we will take turns to take the item. Only fellow Taoist has just entered our alliance. Due to the previous agreement, we can't give it to you. However, when we meet next time, fellow Taoist can take it, and the two of us will do our best to help." The Taoist on the right also said, "And when it comes time for us to take this item, fellow Taoist will also do his best to help me." Zhang Yan understood. There seemed to be more than one item, so the two of them had originally agreed to take turns to take it. This was also in line with his initial expectations. The God Refinement Grand Elder could create countless things in the world. Such items looked very rare, but they should not have landed in just one place. This was because the ownership of the item this time seemed to have been decided, and he could not give it to him. If he wanted to obtain it, he could only wait for the next time. He thought for a moment and said, "If that's the case, this time, I will help the two of you to expel the Tao of Virtue." The two Grand Elders looked at each other and nodded. Even though Zhang Yan did not agree with how to deal with the item, as long as he agreed to help them expel the Tao of Virtue, then the rest of the matter could be discussed. Moreover, there were two of them, so they were not afraid of Zhang Yan alone, so they were not afraid of him making any excessive requests. The Taoist on the left waved his hand, and a contract immediately fell. "If that's the case, then we will make an agreement here." Zhang Yan looked at it and saw that it only mentioned the expulsion of the Tao of Virtue, and nothing else was mentioned. This was also in line with his intentions. He smiled and extended his finger to touch it, leaving a golden seal, which was considered as agreeing to the matter. Seeing this, the two of them were also relieved. Then, they also raised their fingers and touched it. In reality, when one reached the God Refinement realm, the restriction of the contract was already extremely small, and the only thing that was binding each other was interests. But unless they completely gave up on obtaining the item, then they would always have to stick together, and sometimes, the relationship of interests was actually more solid. At this moment, the Taoist on the left said, "If I fight with Quan Dao, it will be inevitable that the world will collapse." "Last time, you said that you have a treasure that can protect the world." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Yes." The Taoist on the right said, "I wonder if it is convenient for us to take a look." Zhang Yan knew that the two of them were still worried that he would play some tricks, so he smiled and said, "Why not?" With a thought, he summoned the Tai golden bead, and it floated above him. The two of them looked at it attentively, but other than seeing that the bead was born innately, they could not find anything else. In reality, there was nothing special about the bead itself. It was just a primordial treasure that came from Bu Su Tian, and after being refined by Zhang Yan, it could carry his true Weili body. Of course, the two of them could not see anything special about it. Seeing that there was nothing out of the ordinary, Quan Daoist finally relaxed. However, this did not mean that the two of them had let down their guard. This was because they could not get rid of the uneasiness in their hearts. If anything happened after Zhang Yan used this treasure, they would go and stop it immediately. Zhang Yan said, "When do you two plan to make a move?" The Taoist on the left said, "The two of us came to see you with great fanfare." At this moment, the Tao of virtue and virtue must be very vigilant. We can order the third prince to attack the heavenly court, and let them think that we are still pinning our hopes on them. When they relax, it will not be too late to fight with them. What do you think, Tao friend? Zhang Yan had some doubts about this, and only after asking in detail did he find out. It turned out that there was a secret agreement between the path of virtue and the path of virtue. If there was a part of the true body that was about to descend into the modern world, then the other side definitely could not destroy the modern world. Because if everyone did this, then in the end, no one would be able to obtain that thing. This was also why the two sides previously maintained the situation of fighting but not destroying each other. But now that he had the bead in his hand, he could stabilize the present world, and it would not collapse because of the battle between the two sides. Naturally, there was no need to keep this promise. However, the Tao of virtue and virtue didn't know about this, so as long as they didn't make a move at the first moment, then they would definitely think that they had victory in their hands. As time passed, it was very likely that they would let down their guard. At that time, they would be prepared against the unprepared, and their chances of winning would be much higher. Zhang Yan thought for a while. Since the two of them had already decided to fight with the Tao of virtue and virtue, then it would not be a big deal to delay it a little. Thus, he said, "That's fine, then let's set the deadline for a year, how about it?" The Taoists discussed for a while, and one of them replied, "As you say, Tao friend." At this moment, in the lower realm, the third prince Hao Chang received Yin Kuang's promise, and he was overjoyed. He immediately raised the flag and gathered the scattered immortals and demons of the various realms, preparing to attack the heavenly court and seize the throne. In a moment, his prestige also rose. And when he was preparing, one day, suddenly, an itinerant immortal came and handed him a token, and asked to meet him. After Hao Chang saw the token, he was hesitant, but in the end, he still ordered someone to invite him in. The itinerant immortal entered the room and cupped his hands. "This lowly one greets the Third Highness." Hao Chang didn't give him any face, and he said, "Speak, why did Heavenly Mother send you here?" The itinerant immortal said calmly, "Why is your Highness so impolite? In the end, you and Heavenly Mother are one family." Hao Chang said coldly, "My Hao family and Nya family aren't one family." The itinerant immortal said with deep meaning, "Even if we aren't one family, we can still become one. What does your Highness think?" Hao Chang's heart moved, and he immediately thought of a certain possibility. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant, and he said, "What do you mean?" The itinerant immortal didn't answer directly, and he only cupped his hands at the sky. "Your Highness should know that not only is your Highness unhappy that the 14th prince is chosen by Di Tian, but Heavenly Mother is also unhappy about it. However, Di Tian has already made up his mind, and we can't go against it." Hao Chang pretended to be calm and said, "So what? The itinerant immortal took a step forward and said in a low voice, "If Heavenly Mother is willing to accept your highness as her son, then wouldn't the Nye family also be related? If your highness agrees, with Heavenly Mother's help, it will be easy to wipe out the celestial heavens." Hao Chang looked at this person coldly, but the latter looked back at him calmly. After a long time, he said, "Why doesn't Heavenly Mother accept the 14th prince as her son? Why give up what is near and take what is far?" The itinerant immortal sighed helplessly and said, "This is because Celestial the Arch isn't willing, but what can he do? As a member of the Hao family, your highness should know the reason behind this." Hao Chang thought about it and couldn't help but nod. Although the Hao family and the Nye family supported each other and supported the celestial heavens together, they were also at odds with each other. If the prince succeeded the throne, he would have to balance the interests of both sides. Originally, with second prince's identity, he would be perfectly qualified to inherit the throne. However, he was dead, and it wouldn't be easy to find a successor. Or rather, both sides were worried, so Celestial the Arch could only choose to suppress the Nye family in order to stabilize the successor's position. Hao Chang was different. Although he was also a prince of the Hao family, he had already fallen out with Celestial the Arch and the people behind him. If he obtained Heavenly Mother's support and ascended to the throne, then both sides would be able to find what the other needed. Compared to the benefits, the massacre of the Nye family could be completely ignored. Thinking of this, his expression relaxed, and he said, "Envoy, you can leave first. Let me think about it for a while before I give my reply." Chapter 1930. Hao Chang sent the messenger away and went to the back hall. Taoist Run Ming was sitting there. Hao Chang cherished his life very much. If he wasn't here to protect him, he wouldn't have gone to see Heavenly Mother Lai's messenger alone. That was why he invited him to be here from the start. He bowed and said, "Just now, what do you think of the messenger's words?" Run Ming said calmly, "As long as it's beneficial for your highness to inherit the throne and you're willing to worship Quan Dao as the orthodox religion, I think it's fine." He didn't care who held the power in the celestial heavens, as long as the person sitting on the throne was willing to worship Quan Dao as the orthodox religion. To put it bluntly, Quan Dao just needed a title. If it didn't matter, he couldn't be bothered to care about anything else. Hao Chang was happy to see that he didn't object. He cupped his hands and returned to the front hall excitedly. He found a few of his trusted subordinates to discuss the matter. After a round of discussion, they all agreed that it was feasible. Hao clan and Yun clan controlled the celestial heavens together, so Heavenly Mother Lai had quite a bit of power in her hands. If they worked together, Heavenly Mother Lai might not come to help him, but as long as this power was restrained and didn't cause trouble for them, the resistance to attack the celestial heavens would be greatly reduced. Hao Chang had a plan in mind, but he didn't hurry to find the messenger. Instead, he left him there. This itinerant immortal wasn't in a hurry either. Other than cultivating, he would feast and enjoy himself. It was as if he didn't care about his trip at all. It was only after a month had passed that he was summoned back to the palace. When he saw the third prince, he immediately asked, "Your Highness, have you thought it through?" Hao Chang looked at him and said, "You don't seem to be in a hurry at all." The itinerant immortal laughed and said, "Although I'm here on Heavenly Mother's orders, I don't have to succeed. Why should I be in a hurry? Also, if I can't go here, I can go somewhere else." Hao Chang said, "Oh. Other than me, is there anyone else?" That loose immortal said, "Of course there are. For example, the 11th prince of Yen Law Kingdom." Hao Chang frowned. Although Hao Ning's forces were far inferior to his, if the Heavenly Mother recognized him as her son, there was a real possibility that he could replace him. After all, in the Battle of the Princes, apart from him, only his 11th brother had not been expelled. Fortunately, the other party had come to him first and had not left even after being ignored for so long. It was obvious that he thought more highly of him. At this moment, he didn't want to beat around the bush and said directly, after thinking about it, "I agree with the emissary's words. I'm willing to honor the Heavenly Mother as my mother." Hearing this, the itinerant immortal's expression brightened up, and he said, "Then please bring me a keepsake. I can go back and report to Heavenly Mother. Hao Chang gestured, and an attendant came over with a jade pendant. He said, "This is the jade pendant that I always carry with me. It was personally bestowed by His Majesty back then, Heavenly Mother should know about it." After receiving the item, the itinerant immortal cupped his hands and said, "Then please wait for a moment, Your Highness. I will be able to bring Heavenly Mother's reply in 3 to 5 days at the latest." Hao Chang said, "Thank you, emissary, I won't send you off." The itinerant immortal returned to the celestial heavens, and as expected, a few days later, he came back and presented a secret decree personally written by the Heavenly Mother. After Hao Chang read it, he became amiable to the itinerant immortal, and he said, "Emissary, did you attract anyone's attention when you came?" The itinerant immortal said, "Don't worry, Your Highness, I don't normally interact with the Heavenly Mother, so no one knows that I'm from the Heavenly Mother." Hao Chang said, "Other than this letter, does the Heavenly Mother have anything else to say?" The itinerant immortal said, "The Heavenly Mother wishes to meet with Your Highness." Hao Chang nodded. After the meeting, both sides could be at ease. However, now that his and the Heavenly Mother's every move was being watched, they couldn't be there personally, and there was no need to do so. They just needed to use talismans to summon their shadows. After the two agreed on a date, the emissary was about to leave when Hao Chang suddenly thought of something, and he said, "How is my 14th brother?" The itinerant immortal said, "He follows His Majesty every day, and His Majesty cares a lot about this Highness. Not to mention personally teaching him, some of the memorials are also being read by this Highness." A hint of jealousy appeared in Hao Chang's eyes. Ever since he was young, he had tried to imitate Celestial Emperor's words and actions, partly because he admired Celestial Emperor, and partly because he wanted Celestial Emperor to think highly of him. But who would have thought that Celestial Emperor would turn a blind eye to him, and was against spoiling this little brother of his that had nothing special? He sneered, after killing his way to the celestial heavens, he would naturally be able to prove that Celestial Emperor made the wrong choice back then. He chatted with the emissary for a while and set a date for the meeting. A few days later, it was the appointed time. With the help of Taoist Run Ming's divine art, Hao Chang's consciousness blurred, and he found himself immersed in a place where clouds were surging all around, and he couldn't tell where he was at all. Not long after, he saw rays of light, and golden flowers dancing in the air. Then, he saw a beautiful woman wearing a phoenix crown and a red cape standing there. As her long and narrow phoenix eyes moved, they were filled with disdain, and people didn't dare to look at her directly. When Hao Chang saw her face, he unconsciously revealed a look of reverence, and he bowed, saying, "Greetings, Heavenly Mother." The Heavenly Mother's red lips opened, and she said, "Do you still address me like this, Your Highness, the three sovereigns?" Hao Chang paused, and he bowed again, saying, "Yes, your son greets Mother." Heavenly Mother grunted, and she raised her hand, saying, "My son, you may dispense with the formalities." At the same time, she tilted her head slightly, and she glanced at a certain place through the land of shadows. Taoist Run Ming's gaze happened to meet hers, and even though they were separated by countless worlds, he could feel that Heavenly Mother was looking at him. However, his expression didn't change. Even if they met in the form of shadows, he couldn't guarantee that nothing could affect Hao Chang, so he had to watch from the side. Heavenly Mother retracted her gaze, and she looked at the third prince, saying, "Since you think of me as your mother, I should also clarify something for you." Hao Chang replied respectfully, "What is it? Please enlighten me, Mother." Heavenly Mother said, "This is related to my son's life, and my son needs to know that since Celestial Emperor and you are related by blood, he is also the leader of the Hao clan, so he has an ability. As long as he is willing to use it, he can kill any Hao clan descendant. If my son goes against the celestial heavens, you need to be wary of this." Hao Chang was shocked, and he said, "There's such a thing?" Then, he looked at her with a suspicious gaze, and he said, "Mother, is it really so?" His suspicions were reasonable. If Celestial Emperor really had such an ability, then he could take his life at any time, so why did he have to send a heavenly monarch to fight? Moreover, he was openly declaring his intention to wipe out the celestial heavens, but Celestial Emperor didn't do anything to him. Heavenly Mother said, I didn't lie to you, you are fine. Maybe Celestial Emperor has other considerations, or maybe he is limited by something and can't do it. Hao Chang pondered for a moment, and he asked, this is a secret, how did you know, Mother? Heavenly Mother said indifferently, I am the leader of the Hao clan, and I also have this ability. Hao Chang's expression changed slightly. This was very easy to verify, and he could just find any Hao clansman. Heavenly Mother wouldn't use this to trick him. He bowed, and he said, thank you for the reminder, Mother. Heavenly Mother waved her hand, and she said, don't worry, my son, just be careful. When you lead the people to the celestial heavens, the Hao clan will lead the way for you. Hao Chang bowed again, and he said, however, there is one more thing that Mother should know, the person supporting me is a perfected Tao true immortal. When I ascend, I will make perfected Tao the orthodox religion. What do you think, Mother? Heavenly Mother said indifferently, who is the orthodox religion is the matter of the heavenly clan. After my son ascends, you can decide for yourself. Hao Chang heaved a sigh of relief. This matter was settled, and there was no longer any hindrance between the two. Using this chance, he asked Heavenly Mother about the layout of the celestial heavens, and the latter seemed to be completely honest with him, telling him everything she knew. He was very excited. With this, the chances of winning against the celestial heavens increased greatly. When he had nothing else to ask, he bade farewell to Heavenly Mother, and his consciousness returned to his body. At this moment, he couldn't care about anything else, and he went to find Taoist Run Ming, and he asked, Taoist, Heavenly Mother said that Celestial Emperor has a way to decide the lives of his clansmen, is it true? Taoist Run Ming was shocked at first, but later on, he thought that if there was such a thing, there was no reason for the patriarch not to know, and if he didn't mention it, then it was not important. Therefore, he said, don't worry, Prince. With Grand Supreme's protection, who can hurt you? Not to mention that your Highness is fine now, even if your Highness is really dead, you can still be saved. Although he said that, a person only had one imprint in this world, if he was killed, even if he was summoned back, he wouldn't be the same person anymore. He said this to make Hao Chang feel at ease. Hearing this, Hao Chang was much more at ease. Now, he was the only one in perfected Tao who could sit on the seat of the orthodox religion, so he wouldn't let anything happen to him. Therefore, he didn't worry about this matter anymore, and after returning to the hall, he immediately gathered everyone to discuss the matter of attacking the celestial heavens. Because Taoist Run Ming had reminded him that there was a change in the heavens, and he had to act as soon as possible, he acted quickly this time, and in less than half a month, everything was settled. This time, Ying Kuang went to the depths of the void, and was in charge of restraining the celestial lords. On his side, with the help of a group of perfected immortals, he led millions of demon soldiers and tens of thousands of Qi practitioners, broke through the border river, and attacked the celestial heavens. The celestial heavens was surrounded by divine mountains and celestial rivers, and usually, there were immortal officers and generals guarding it, and there were celestial lords patrolling outside, so it was unbreakable. But this time, Hao Chang's army was outside, and there was no one to stop them. There were even some Nya clansmen who secretly withdrew their men, opened the gates, and let him in. Along the way, they didn't meet any decent obstacles, and many dangerous passes were easily passed by. While advancing smoothly, he was also shocked by the power of the Heaven Mother. But now, he didn't have the mood to think about this. In just a few days, the army arrived in front of the Heaven Boundary Monument, and after passing it, the main hall of the celestial heavens, where Ying Yuan's treasure hall was located. Chapter 1931. Hao Chang stood on Jing Luan's platform and looked over. He saw Ying Yuan's hall standing tall in the sea of clouds. The atmosphere was solemn and solemn. Rainbow lights flashed in the sky, and when the clear air scattered down, the eaves, vermilion platform, broad ridge and high tower were all covered in a dazzling golden light. According to the rules of the Heaven Court, the Crown Prince could not be summoned and could not come to the main hall for no reason, so he rarely came here. But he also knew that although this hall seemed to be not far from them, it was not an easy thing to get there. This hall existed in three things at the same time. The first was hidden under the light of the stars, the second was above the world, and the third was inside the stomach of Hun-yi. The stars of the heavens shone all over the world, and the heaven court existed in every ray of starlight. If one wanted to attack, the first step was to cover or destroy the starlight so that it could escape. Above the world meant that the heaven court did not exist in any of the realms, and it was constantly changing. If one could not receive it, it would be hard to find the main entrance. As for Hun-yi, it was a monster in the legends. It had no form and no one had seen it before, and no one knew where it was. But the heaven court did exist in its stomach. This monster only listened to the orders of the celestial monarch. If it was not ordered by the celestial monarch, even if it found the hall, it would only be a mirage. Even if it overthrew the celestial monarch and came out, everything that happened here would be nothing. It would be as if nothing had happened. As long as one of the three couldn't be solved, they would not be able to wipe out the heaven court. But even if they got past these three, it was not the end. There was still a formation set by the Tao of virtue and virtue outside the hall. Usually, there was a heavenly talisman personally made by the Grand Elder. Luckily, the talisman had been stolen, so it was not as difficult to deal with as before. Hao Chang looked at Daoist Run Ming who was standing beside him and asked, "Daoist, we are already here, what should we do next?" Daoist Run Ming told him that there was a way to solve these three obstacles, but he did not want to reveal the secrets of heaven, so he did not say much. Now that he was here, there was no need to be so cautious. Priest Run Ming said, "Your Highness, please be at ease. Watch I's methods." He took out a flag from his sleeve, shook it, and unfurled it in the wind. He casually tossed it into the sky, and the flag rode the wind straight into the sky. Then, he spread it out. In just a few breaths, the day turned into night, and the stars in the sky were covered. He said, "If Lord Taibai Jinxing discovers the changes here, he will definitely try to break through the flag and force his way in. If there are many of them, then I will not be able to hide it. Fortunately, there is the left imperial censor there to deal with it, so there is no need to worry for now. Your Highness only needs to quickly go to the other two places to make arrangements." Hao Chang said, "Then we have to find the Sky Hall quickly." At this time, Daoist Run Ming stretched out his hand and pointed. A cloud of smoke rose from the flat ground and an ancient flying carriage appeared in front of everyone. A bronze man stood in front of the carriage. He raised his hand and pointed straight ahead, pointing at a certain place. He made an inviting gesture and said, "Your Highness, please get on the carriage." Hao Chang took a look at the carriage and stepped on it. Just now, when he steadied himself, he saw the bronze man in front of the carriage turn around and his finger moved to a certain place. Through the carriage, he could faintly feel that there was something there. His heart moved, and he said, "Daoist, could it be?" Daoist Run Ming nodded and said, "Your Highness has the Emperor's chi on you, and you are related to the celestial monarch by blood. With this as a guide, you will be able to find the right path. However, this carriage needs to be driven by your Highness personally, and no one can replace you. Otherwise, the chi dynamic will be messed up, and you will definitely lose your direction." Hao Chang agreed, and then said, "But how do we get past the Hun-yi stage?" Daoist Run Ming said, "With Grandmaster here, your Highness need not worry about this. Just walk, and you will naturally reach the Sky Hall." It was absolutely impossible to sweep the heaven court with just the forces in Hao Chang's hands. Therefore, this was not only a contest between the Emperor's son and the celestial monarch, but also a contest between the Grand Elders. At this moment, in the Liwang Mountain, the two Grand Elders, Zhang Yan and Quan Dao, were paying attention to Hao Chang's every move. Grand Elder Quan Dao, who was sitting on the left, said, "The Hun-yi stage is formed by the fate of heaven and earth, and coexists with the heaven court. I will use my mana to force it to open its mouth." The Daoist on the right said, "Later on, when we cast the spell, Tao of virtue will definitely come to stop us. Just the two of us alone might not be able to do it, so please help us." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This is a small matter. After getting his reply, Quan Dao and Grand Elder Quan Dao used their mana to force the monster to open its mouth and open its path. As expected, the three Grand Elders of Virtue and Dao reacted immediately, and they also used their mana to stop them. Zhang Yan knew that it was impossible for Quan Dao to block all of their mana since it was 2 against 3. Therefore, he had to overcome this part of the resistance by himself. In fact, Quan Dao and Grand Elder Quan Dao were also using this to see how strong he was. As he was in the Gu Luo world, his mana was far stronger than these Grand Elders, so it was not difficult for him to do so. At this moment, with a thought, it was like a torrent rushing into the muddy water, and it easily swept away the mana that was blocking him. It also forced Hunyi to reveal the location of the Heaven Court. On the other side, Yin Kuang came to the depths of the void again. He would not miss any chance to weaken the Heaven Court. With the third prince restraining the Heaven Court and the true immortal of Virtue and Tao, he could fight with the celestial lords without worry. But just as he was about to make his move, he suddenly felt something. However, he suddenly felt something and turned around to see a Daoist standing there. He frowned and said, "Daoist Ji Lu." Ji Yu bowed and said, "Left Imperial Censor, if you are willing to back out now, I won't make things difficult for you." Yin Kuang shook his head and said, "It's not my first time fighting with you. Did you forget the result of our previous fight?" Ji Yu said, "Then does Left Imperial Censor remember that you have received the Edict of Virtue and Tao?" Yin Kuang said calmly, "So what? It's just an edict. When it's time to use it, use it. When it's not, it's useless." Ji Yu sighed and said, "Since Left Imperial Censor is so stubborn, I can only take you down personally." As he spoke, he took out a hand sign. Instantly, a rainbow light flew into the sky and circled around, trapping Yin Kuang. It seemed like even the protection of the heavenly talisman was useless. The problem was actually with the edict. When Tao of Virtue and Tao gave out the edict, he also set up a trap. If there was someone who accepted the edict but was unwilling to comply, regardless of whether the edict was with them or not, once the cause and effect was established, they could do whatever they wanted to them. Ji Yu originally thought that this matter was in the bag, but at this moment, spiritual light soared like fire from Yin Kuang's body. The rainbow light chain was instantly burned to ashes. Yin Kuang struggled again, and the last remaining ember also dissipated into the void. Ji Yu couldn't help but frown and said, "So Left Imperial Censor was already prepared." Yin Kuang, however, was silent. He had long guessed that there might be a problem with the edict, so before he came, he asked Mount Forgottenly to give him a protective talisman as a precaution. He didn't think that it would really be used. Ji Yu said angrily, "Even without the edict, I can still stop you here." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a flash of light. Then, Ji Chang, Ji Sheng, and the others stepped out of the void. The three of them each stood in a direction, surrounding Yin Kuang in the middle. Ji Yu transmitted his voice, "Junior brothers, the third prince has already killed his way to Yin Yuan's Hall of Treasures. We need to take him down as soon as possible, then rush back to help." Ji Chang and Ji Yu agreed in unison. Yin Kuang's expression became much more serious. There was no chance of winning against three true immortals of Tao of Virtue and Tao. At this moment, the wisest thing to do was to turn around and leave. He believed that after they confirmed that he had left, they wouldn't continue to chase after him. However, after thinking about it, he decided to stay here and deal with the three of them. If he could delay the three true immortals of Tao of Virtue and Tao of Virtue there was no doubt that the pressure on the Heaven Court would be even greater. If the celestial monarch was overthrown and replaced by the third prince, then it would be even better. Whether it was the ability to govern the world or the prestige of the current celestial monarch, the 10,000 worlds would definitely be unstable. At that time, it would be even easier to deal with the true immortals. Thinking of this, he activated the heavenly talisman, and clouds of clear air rushed toward the three of them. Hao Chang drove the carriage forward, but after a while, he saw the bronze man's hands suddenly pointing to the left, then to the right, and then up and down. He couldn't help but frown. "Taoist priest, we don't know where to go." Priest Run Ming said, Wherever the bronze man points, your highness will go. You don't have to worry about the road ahead. The people behind, just follow the carriage. Hao Cheng thought about it and immediately came to a realization. The location of the heavenly court had always been uncertain. It was even possible that the heavenly court was avoiding them because of the heavenly emperor, which was why such a situation occurred. He didn't think too much about it and followed the directions. He continued to drive the flying carriage. The army behind him also locked onto the large turtle on the carriage and followed it. The Qi practitioners were easier to deal with. After receiving offerings, they would do what they were supposed to do. However, the billions of demon soldiers were extremely undisciplined. Even if there were demon generals without anyone to control them, they would definitely not be so obedient. Fortunately, a virtuous perfected immortal had cast a spell in advance. At this moment, these people had become muddle-headed and only knew how to follow orders. They would not wake up until they reached the land. After walking for an unknown period of time, they seemed to have passed some kind of barrier. Hao Cheng only felt his body tremble, and at the same time, he let out a sigh of relief and said, "We have entered the Hunyi's stomach." Not only him, although the people around him didn't see this monster, they were very clear that they had entered its stomach. At this moment, the clouds in front of them dispersed, and a path paved with gold and jade appeared in front of them. The end of the path extended all the way to the front of a majestic palace. Priest Run Ming said, "Your Highness, we have already arrived in front of Ying Yuan's hall. We will deal with the restriction outside, please give the order, Your Highness." Hao Cheng let out a sigh of relief and suppressed the excitement in his heart. Then, he looked forward and slowly raised his hand, then clenched it heavily. Following this action, rows of flags on both sides of the carriage were erected. With a rumble, countless demon soldiers behind him let out a deafening roar. Clouds of demon wind and black clouds rose up, and like a wave, they rushed towards the vast and boundless palace. Chapter 1932. The array above the Ying Yuan Palace Hall rippled like water, revealing a real path. Countless demon soldiers rushed in, and from time to time, some of the demon soldiers that were pushed to the side touched the edge of the array and were sucked in, turning into dust in an instant. Taoist Run Ming and his 4 fellow disciples were standing together, using their magic power to suppress the array around the palace hall. Because of the lack of the heavenly talisman, the array that was used to change the direction of the array did not have much power left. Therefore, they did not use the usual method to break the array, but directly used the method of direct confrontation. Due to the fact that some parts of the array could not be broken in time, the demon soldiers that entered the array would undoubtedly suffer heavy casualties. However, they did not care about this. There were countless demons, and when the 3rd prince ascended to the throne, there would be no need for them anymore. Now that some of them died, it would be considered as getting rid of the poison in the world in advance. The Ying Yuan Palace Hall was made up of more than 1,000 palaces. Apart from the array, there were also guards and immortal officials and divine generals guarding each of the palaces. It was not completely unguarded. When the demon soldiers rushed in, they immediately collided with these guards. All kinds of spiritual lights and even smoke rose, and rumbling sounds came one after another. In front of the palace hall, a golden-armored divine general stood on a high tower, listening to the faint sounds coming from afar. There was a trace of uneasiness between his brows, and he asked, "Has the talisman been sent out?" The divine general beside him replied, reporting to Palace Master, "It has been sent out long ago." The divine general looked at the sky and said anxiously, "Then why haven't the celestial lords come to help?" The divine general whispered, "Perhaps they have been obstructed. Since the 3rd prince has come to attack the Sky Palace Hall, he will definitely try to stop the celestial lords." The divine general slammed his fist on the railing, and even the watchtower, which had been refined with immortal methods, shook. He said with a heavy expression, "We can't count on the celestial lords anymore. Hurry up and invite the celestial masters of the Tao of Virtue." There were a total of 6 celestial masters in the heavenly court. 5 of them were from the path of virtue. Only the newly conferred celestial master, Immortal Yuhan, was from the path of perfection. They were usually worshipped by the heavenly court and represented the two Taoist lineages to mediate the heavens. Originally, they did not belong to the heavenly court and the celestial emperor could not command them. However, the celestial general believed that as long as the path of virtue was unwilling to give up the position of the orthodox sect, they would definitely appear to protect it. Hao Chang looked at the demon soldiers advancing layer by layer, breaking through countless palaces along the way. His heart was very excited. Suddenly, many of the big formations in front of him that were pushed apart suddenly closed up, separating the demons that were attacking this place into several groups. Even in front of the main doors of the palaces, an air barrier was raised in the air. The originally endless force that was rushing in was blocked, like a wave crashing into a reef. His expression darkened, and he said, "What's going on?" Taoist Run Ming said, "Don't worry, this is the appearance of Celestial Master of Virtue and Virtue. This is already within our expectations. These people are just juniors, and they are not proficient in Tao techniques yet, so just let I handle them." He took out his horsetail whisk and placed it on the crook of his arm. After circulating his technique for a moment, with just a point of his finger, the formation that was closing up was pushed apart again. The few waves of magic power behind him collided with him a few times, but they were all injured and defeated. Without these obstacles, the attack became smoother. After that, the attack became much smoother. After all, apart from the demon soldiers, the third prince also had more than 10,000 cultivators that he had recruited. Among them, there were many itinerant immortals, and their strength was not to be underestimated. On the other hand, the heavenly court did not have the protection of the Star Lords and only had a few palace guards and virtuous cultivators. They were unable to stop the attack and could only retreat. Hao Chang's army had been advancing for more than 100 days, and the demon soldier at the front had finally reached the main hall of the Yingyuanbao Palace. But the moment he stepped on the empty space in front of the palace, there was suddenly a thunderous roar in the sky. The demon soldier immediately turned into ashes, along with millions of demons and hundreds of Qi practitioners behind him. A Taoist dressed in a Taoist robe appeared in the sky. It was perfected immortal Quan Dao, Ji Quan. Taoist Yin Ming saw this person from behind and circulated his technique to look around. He saw that Ji Lu and the others were not here, and only Ji Quan was here. He knew that Ji Quan was most likely being held up by Yin Kuang. With a thought, he instantly went over and stood opposite of Ji Quan. He cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist, you can't stop us by yourself, why don't you make way to avoid harming the harmony between the two families?" Ji Quan frowned and said, "You lost the last time, why didn't you keep your promise and come to invade the heaven court?" Taoist Yin Ming said seriously, "Fellow Taoist, you're wrong. The battle of the heaven court is the Hao family's matter, we came under the third prince's invitation, how could we go against our promise?" Ji Quan knew that he could not make the other party retreat with words, he could not even think about delaying them, so he said in a deep voice, "Then there's no need to say anything more, if you have any skills, just use them." Taoist Yin Ming said, "Please," and the two of them instantly fought. When Taoist Run Ming saw this, he immediately took out a spell, and the place where the two of them were fighting was instantly covered, the aftermath could no longer hit below. He turned around and said to Hao Chang, "Your Highness, we can go forward now, if there are any obstacles in the way, I will naturally block them." Hao Chang nodded and started the carriage. The entire ceremonial procession moved forward slowly, passing through the path opened by many demon soldiers towards Yin Yuan's Hall of Treasures. The journey was not smooth, true immortals of the Tao of Virtue would appear to obstruct them from time to time, but they were all blocked by the people of Quan Dao. Because Ji Lu and the other two had yet to return from the battle with Yin Kuang, the people of Quan Dao handled the situation very calmly. Not long after, Hao Chang's carriage arrived at the bottom of the steps of the main hall. Looking at the horizontal board with the words, Yin Yuan, on top of the main hall, he was excited, he turned his head and said, "Taoist, please follow me into the hall." Taoist Run Ming cupped his hands and said, "I will naturally follow." Hao Chang tidied up his robe, walked up the steps to the platform, entered the main hall, and walked inside. Taoist Run Ming silently accompanied him at the side. After passing through 3 main halls, the two of them finally arrived at the main hall. Hao Chang stepped in and raised his head to look, and his body couldn't help but tremble slightly. The heavenly emperor of the Hao family was sitting on the throne, wearing an emperor's crown with 5 colored beads hanging down, a red hairpin tied to a scarlet hairpin, and a red hairpin to cover his ears. He was dressed in the robe of the Tian de cult, with the sun, moon, stars, mountains, and rivers on it, the universe on his waist, and the stars on his feet. His face couldn't be seen clearly, but he was like a statue of a god in a temple, dignified and solemn, as if he had been waiting there for a long time. When he saw Hao Chang enter, he slowly said, "My son is here." Hao Chang's expression stiffened slightly. In the past, when he met the heavenly emperor, he was cold, distant, and unapproachable. Instead of saying they were father and son, they were more like a ruler and his subject. But today, it seemed to be very different from the past, and there was a sense of closeness, which made him feel a little uncomfortable. He took a deep breath. Before coming here, he had prepared a lot of things to say, but when he arrived here, he realized that they were all superfluous. He walked straight to the front of the Jade Emperor, bowed, and said, "Your son respectfully requests your majesty to abdicate the throne." The heavenly emperor slowly said, "Since my son wants the throne, then take it." Hao Chang was startled, and he suddenly raised his head to look at the heavenly emperor in disbelief. He didn't expect the heavenly emperor to be so easy to talk to, and he couldn't help but suspect whether the heavenly emperor was playing some tricks, and his eyes also showed vigilance. The heavenly emperor seemed to see through his doubts, and he patted the emperor's throne, sighed, and said, "My son only sees the benefits of the throne, but he doesn't see the restrictions within. As the emperor of the heavens, he is both favored by the heaven and earth's fate, and also restricted by the heaven and earth's fate." Hao Chang was puzzled, and he asked, "What do you mean?" The heavenly emperor sighed, and he said, "Ever since I became the heavenly emperor, my words and actions have been restricted by the heaven and earth's rules, and I have never been able to do as I please. I can only follow my heart for a moment every day, and although I'm called the heavenly emperor, I'm actually just a puppet controlled by the heaven and earth's fate." Hao Chang couldn't help but be shocked when he heard that. After asking a few more questions, he understood that when the Hao clan's celestial being became the heavenly emperor, all of his emotions would be erased, and he would be forced to do so. Ever since the heavenly emperor ascended to the throne, he had always been fighting against this, but there were only a few times every day when he could gain the upper hand, and during these moments when he was free, he would give some orders according to his own will, so sometimes it seemed like his actions were a little contradictory. Not only that, every person who sat on the heavenly emperor's throne would do things exactly the same, as if they were molded from the same mold. They would not be out of line, nor would they be mediocre. However, the heaven and earth had changed, and the heavenly order had declined, so the restraining power on the heavenly emperor would decrease. If not for this, he wouldn't have said so many words today. The heavenly emperor sighed and said, "You are too selfish, you are not suitable for the throne, so I didn't want to choose you." Hao Chang was a little confused, and when he heard the heavenly emperor's words, he blurted out, "Then what about 14th brother?" The heavenly emperor sighed and said, "Although your 14th brother was originally smart, he suffered an accident 100 years ago, and he has lost his mind and wisdom, so he is suitable for the throne." Hao Chang's heart shook. Losing mind and wisdom was not a serious illness, and with the heavenly courts and Tao's methods, it should be able to cure him, but the heavenly court didn't do so. Could it be that someone was trying to stop him? Or was there another reason? The heavenly emperor's gaze fell on him, and he said, "Knowing this, is my son still willing to ascend to the throne?" Hao Chang gritted his teeth and said, "Of course." Who knew whether the heavenly emperor was telling the truth or not? Moreover, he was already here, and there was no way out. Not only those immortal officials and generals who colluded with him, even Daoju would not allow him to do so. The heavenly emperor saw that he was determined, so he didn't say anything more. He took out a square seal and placed it on the table, and he said, "The heavenly emperor imperial seal is here, if my son wants it, he can come and take it." Hao Chang looked over and stared at the big seal, but he didn't move for a long time. But when things came to this, he actually felt a trace of fear. At this moment, Taoist Run Ming reminded him, Your Highness, please come forward and take over the throne. Hao Chang struggled and said, shouldn't we gather all the officials and immortals to establish the title? Daoist Run Ming said, the Grand Elders have an agreement with the Hao family, and the one who holds the imperial seal will be the emperor, so there is no need for the officials to interfere. He then emphasized, Your Highness, please come forward and take the seal. Hao Chang tried to calm his emotions, and he walked forward step by step. When he arrived in front of the table, he looked at the big seal, but his breathing became rapid, and he murmured, all heavens worship the emperor, and all worlds worship him. This should be mine. He reached out and grabbed the imperial seal. Chapter 1933. Hao Chang grabbed the imperial seal and felt his body tremble. He heard the sound of bells ringing in his ears. At the same time, a golden light shone on his body, and his robe instantly turned into the celestial Thearka's robe. With a thought, the formation that shrouded the Ying Yuan Hall disappeared. But before he could rejoice, the golden light faded, and his robe returned to its original appearance. He frowned and turned to look at the celestial arch. Father, what's the reason? The celestial arch replied calmly, although my son has obtained the imperial seal, his reputation is not yet official. I need to announce my abdication to all the realms. Only then can I be the celestial arch. Hao Chang said impatiently, then please issue the edict as soon as possible. The celestial arch said, this needs to be done on a day of worship. It's not appropriate to do it in a hurry. He looked up at the medallion hanging in the hall and asked, Celestial official Gue, when is the appropriate day for my son to ascend the throne? As soon as he finished, there was a flash of golden light, and a bird-beak-faced celestial official stood up and reported, Your Majesty, the day of the heavenly fortune manifestation is on the 3rd day of the next month. That's the most suitable time for you to ascend the throne. The celestial arch said, What does my son think? Hao Chang frowned. There were still 18 days until the 3rd day of the next month. Something could happen in such a long time, but he didn't object. As the celestial Thearka's son, he understood that everything in the celestial court had its own rules. If he didn't follow them, not only would he not be recognized by the celestial officials and celestial monarchs, but he would also give others a wrong impression. In the end, he would be the one to suffer. But he didn't agree immediately. He looked at Daoist Run Ming and asked, What does Daoist think? Daoist Run Ming also understood the reason behind this. He bowed and said, Everything in the celestial court should be decided by Your Highness. I won't interfere. Hao Chang pondered for a moment and said, Then let's set it on this day. At this moment, he suddenly thought of something and asked, Father, Mother said that you can take the lives of the Hao clan's disciples at any time. Is that true? At this point, he was no longer afraid of exposing the fact that he had acknowledged the Heaven Mother as his mother. Moreover, he needed the Heaven Mother's help if he wanted to ascend to the throne. The Sky Emperor would find out sooner or later. Celestial Emperor did not seem to mind this at all. He said, Did Yueji tell you? This isn't a lie, but I won't harm you. Even if I wanted to, you have the protection of Quan Dao, so I won't be able to hurt you. Hao Chang said, Imperial Father said that he is under the control of heaven and earth. Is Imperial Mother the same? The celestial monarch shook his head and said, She doesn't control the universe, so she isn't restricted by it. However, she doesn't have much power other than managing the internal affairs of the celestial court and the Sea clan. But if you ascend to the throne, she can help you settle the internal affairs of the celestial court. Hao Chang thought about it and lowered his voice. He said, I have another question. After I become the emperor, I will also be the leader of the Hao clan. Is it? The Sky Emperor looked at him deeply and said, If my son becomes the leader of the Hao clan, he will have the ability. But I advise you to treat your brothers and clansmen well. Don't make this evil example. At this point, he seemed to have lost interest in talking. I know I don't like to listen to others preach, so I won't say more. I hope you know what to do. When he was about to turn and leave, Daoist Run Ming took a step forward and bowed. He said, Di Zun, please wait. The Sky Emperor stopped and asked politely, is there anything else, Taoist Runming? Taoist Runming said, before Dizun inherits the throne, Dizun needs someone to protect him. We don't want to see any rebels or traitors act rashly. At this time, the Sky Emperor's attitude was extremely important. If someone came to take his life, the third prince might not be able to ascend to the throne. Especially when the Sky Emperor didn't have the imperial seal to protect him, it would be easier for others to take advantage of him. The Sky Emperor didn't refuse when he heard this. He said, all right, then I'll have to trouble Taoist Runming. Taoist Runming murmured in his heart. Then, two disciples of the same generation entered the room. They arrived in front of the Sky Emperor and saluted him. Then, they stood beside him. The Sky Emperor didn't show any displeasure. Instead, he said, thank you, Taoist Runming. The two Taoists bowed and left with the Celestial Emperor. Hao Chang went to the throne in front of the hall. He wanted to sit on it immediately, but he felt that the throne was faintly rejecting him. If he forced himself to sit, it would be inappropriate. In the end, he could only raise his palm and pat the ridge of the throne. Taoist Runming looked at him and said, Your Highness, you seem to be worried. Hao Chang said, Taoist Runming, there might be people who oppose my succession. Taoist Runming smiled and said, with me, the Sky Emperor, and the support of Heavenly Mother Kuang, who would dare to oppose your highness? Hao Chang nodded and said, maybe I'm thinking too much. Then, he seemed to remember something and said, I almost forgot, I should go and pay my respects to Heavenly Mother Kuang. Taoist Runming said, of course, your highness should go as soon as possible and use Heavenly Mother Kuang's hand to settle the internal and external affairs. In the Forgottenly Mountain, the two grand elders of Quan Dao had been paying attention to the changes in the Heaven Court. They nodded and thought that the third prince's ascension to the throne was no longer a problem. The Taoist on the left said, the third prince has already obtained the Heavenly Emperor's seal. He just needs to wait for the Heavenly Emperor's edict to announce it to the heavens, then he can succeed the throne. At that time, he will be able to get rid of the name of Tao of Virtue and honor Quan Dao as the orthodox sect. The Taoist on the right also nodded and said to Zhang Yan, if Tao of Virtue retreats, we can avoid a fight. However, we still need to rely on Taoist friends' help in the future. They believed that they used the proper method this time. After Quan Dao became the orthodox sect, according to the agreement, even if Tao of Virtue's main body came over, it would not be good for him to seize the throne. They just needed to think of a way to protect their position as the orthodox sect so that it would not be taken away again. In this, Zhang Yan's role was extremely important. Because with him here, Quan Dao would not be at a disadvantage when facing Tao of Virtue and Tao of Virtue. Zhang Yan smiled and said, what Taoist friend said might not be true. The Taoist on the right said, Taoist friend, you seem to have a different opinion. Zhang Yan said, if it is really as you two Taoists think, then it is naturally good. However, it is hard to guess what Tao of Virtue will think. The Taoist on the left said in a deep voice, Taoist friend, are you saying that Tao of Virtue is not willing to abide by the agreement? Zhang Yan said, as for what Tao of Virtue will do, it is also hard for I to say. As for what will happen, we just have to wait and see. Because of the illusion that he created, Tao of Virtue thought that he was about to obtain the throne. However, it was obvious that he was about to succeed, so how could they allow Quan Dao to snatch the throne away at this crucial moment? Moreover, the third prince had only obtained the imperial seal. He had not been worshipped by the Heavenly Mother or the other heavenly gods, nor had he announced it to the heavens. There were still many ways to mess up this matter. Actually, even if the third prince really ascended to the throne, from the perspective of outsiders, it was considered an act of rebellion because he had forcefully seized the throne by attacking the heavenly court. The other princes could use this as an excuse to suppress him. In this way, Tao of Virtue could use the reason that the throne had not been decided as an excuse to delay the matter for a long time. Quan Dao and the Taoist also understood what Zhang Yan meant. However, everything still depended on Tao of Virtue's attitude. However, if at this stage, Tao of Virtue still refused to give in, then there was nothing else they could do. They could only fight to determine the outcome. In the blink of an eye, a few days passed. The celestial Arch issued an edict to pass the throne to the third prince, Hao Chang. He also ordered the messengers to spread the edict to the heavens, announce it to the myriad worlds, and invite the heavenly immortals to attend the ceremony. However, on the day of the succession, other than the immortals from Quan Dao's lineage, half of the heavenly court's immortal officials and divine generals refused to accept the edict. None of the heavenly star lords came to pay their respects. At the same time, a few princes who were still in the lower realm thought that Hao Chang was plotting to usurp the throne. They all rebelled. These people naturally had the support of Tao of Virtue, so the commotion this time was quite great. Despite many obstacles, Hao Chang still managed to sit on the throne with the help of the Heavenly Mother. However, this position was not stable. This was especially so for the Heavenly Star Lords. They were the martial force that the Heavenly Court relied on the most. Logically speaking, they would never care who the throne belonged to. They would only listen to the orders of the person who owned the imperial seal. However, their reaction was very strange. It was just that Hao Chang did not have the time to deal with this person. He still remembered how he got his position, so after becoming the new emperor, the first thing he did was to remove the worship of Tao of Virtue and make Quan Dao the orthodox religion. However, the disciple who was guarding the sacrificial hall did not pay any attention to it. Because the sacrificial hall was dedicated to the position of the Grand Supreme, it had the protection of the Grand Supreme. Without the permission of the Grand Supreme, outsiders could not even think of taking a step into the hall, let alone moving it away. Therefore, this matter was delayed. After the two Taoists knew about this, they immediately wrote a letter and sent it to Zeke Mountain. They wanted Tao of Virtue and the others to follow the agreement and move the memorial tablets to the side hall as soon as possible. At this time, they were still polite in their wording, not wanting to shed all pretense of cordiality. However, things did not go as they wished. Several days later, the two of them received a reply. The contents of the letter implied that Hao Chang's position was improper, that he was merely a false emperor, and that his edict was too virtuous to be respected. After the Taoist on the right read it, he was silent for a moment, then he sighed and said, "We just wanted to have an agreement with each other so that we could finally sit down and discuss. We didn't expect Tao of Virtue to be so shameless. In that case, don't blame us." The Taoist on the left cupped his hands at Zhang Yan and said, "Now that things have come to this, there is no need to say any more. I hope fellow Taoist can worship the treasure to maintain the appearance of the world. Later, I will invite fellow Taoists to join me in seeking the person of Tao of Virtue." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly, knowing that the matter had been settled. Just when Taoist invited him, he had already been recognized as a fellow Taoist. At this time, if he made a move, it would not alarm the Taoist behind the two Taoist veins. He returned the greeting and said, "Fellow Taoists, please wait for a moment." With a thought, following a flash of brilliance, the Tai golden bead was already standing in the myriad heavens and realms. At this moment, the entire appearance of the world was shrouded by this treasure. At the same time, a vast manna densely covered the myriad heavens and realms. Then, he gently shook his sleeve, stood up from his seat, and said, "Fellow Taoists, it is time for you to experience the wisdom of Tao of Virtue." Chapter 1934. When the Tai golden bead appeared above all realms, the three Taisheng of Virtue and Tao immediately sensed that something was amiss and started to deduce its origin. These three Taisheng used De Ming, De Zhao, and De Zhang as their Taoist names, which were also the names of the consciousness in this realm. But just like how the two Taoists called themselves Quan Zhuan and Quan Yu, these were just names in this realm and had nothing to do with the real body. Such names were also different in many realms. After some deduction, the three of them realized that the origin of this realm was pointing to Li Wang Mountain, and the sign was on the two Taoists. Among the three of them, De Zhang was sitting on the left side of the hall with the appearance of a young man. He thought for a moment and said, "This should be the doing of Quan Dao, I wonder what they want to do." De Zhao was sitting opposite him, and he looked like a middle-aged Taoist in his 40s. He answered, "Could it be that they saw that I refused to speak, so they want to show off to me?" De Zhang laughed, what's the use of this, unless they are prepared to fight with me personally? De Zhao pondered for a moment before he shook his head and said, even though that treasure looks slightly mysterious, that's all there is to it. It's unable to harm me in the slightest. Quan Dao wouldn't be so unwise to rely on it to fight me. Just as the two of them were talking, De Ming, who had been sitting on the main seat, looked up and said, there are guests, why don't the two of you come with me to welcome them? In front of Zik Mountain, outside of the Palace of Tao, many cultivators of Tao of virtue were discussing the mysteries of the Tao of Tao. Suddenly, they heard waves of celestial sounds coming from outside the mountain. They could not help but look for the source of the sound, but they found that the sound was faint and indistinct, and it was difficult to know the source. After a while, they saw clear air surging from outside the sky, golden light spread across the ground, and among them, there were 3 Taoists each with their own Dharma chariots, and wherever they passed by, there were auspicious mists and auspicious clouds. A true immortal who had cultivated changed his expression and exclaimed, Taisheng of Quan Dao. For the matter of the throne, there were many battles between the virtue path and the complete path. As for the people of the virtue path, naturally they would ridicule the complete path. However, at this moment when the Grand Elder arrived, he couldn't help but feel fear in his heart. His thoughts were still clear and he realized that something big had happened. He hurriedly said, Grand Elder Quan Dao is here, something must have happened. Quickly go and report to the Grand Master. At this moment, they heard the chime of a bell in the mountain, and an auspicious light shone down from the summit of Zik Mountain. Dideo and the other 2 came out to welcome them. They cupped their fists and said, we didn't know 3 Dao friends were coming, we didn't welcome you. Please come inside and talk. After exchanging greetings outside, Zhang Yan and Quan Dao followed them into the Dao Palace and took their respective seats. De Zhang was the first to speak, my fellow Taoists, are you here for the celestial sovereign's position? Quan Chuan said in a deep voice, my 3 friends, the 3rd prince, Hao Chang, is steady and resolute, tolerant and has the ability to command people. He is the best choice of the emperor. Now that he has been appointed as the emperor's true master, he originally wanted to make Quan Dao the orthodox sect. Why is your esteemed mountain still not willing to retreat? Isn't this going against the agreement between our 2 sects? De Zhao said, my fellow Taoists, we have already stated in our previous letters that the 3rd prince did not obtain the throne properly. He is only a fake emperor, how can he represent the heavenly ruler? Of course, his edict cannot be taken into account. Quan Chuan said, the 3rd prince succeeded the throne because the previous celestial sovereign abdicated, how is this not proper? The 3rd prince then worshipped the heavenly mother as his mother, so he can be ruled both internally and externally. Since you have lost to me, you should fulfill your promise. De Zhao argued, this is not the end of the game, so how can we talk about winning or losing? Quan Chuan flicked his sleeves and said, since my 3 friends are not willing to reason with me, then we can only fight it out. Quan Dao and the other 2 could hear the warning in his words, but they were not moved at all. De Ming said indifferently, my 3 friends should know that it is not advisable to fight in the present world, or else no one will be able to obtain the item. De Zhao also advised, my fellow Taoists, if you mess up my plan today, I can still ruin your plan in the future. This is not a fight because of personal feelings, it is better to be cautious. Right now, the battle between them was only a battle of wills. Even if they played some tricks, it would not affect the overall situation. However, if they really fought and the present world collapsed, the result would be that neither side would be able to obtain the item, and that would be breaking the agreement. Thus, they did not think that Quan Dao would do this. Right now, he was only threatening them, and his goal was to force them to give in, so why would they agree? Quan Chuan stood up and said, if the 3 of you insist, then there is nothing more to say. De Dao and the other 2 felt that something was wrong. Judging from the other side's intentions, they really wanted to fight them personally. De Ming also saw that something was wrong, so he also stood up and said in a deep voice, my fellow Taoists, be careful. Quan Chuan cupped his hands and said, I have said all I have to say, I will see your wisdom in a moment. After these words were spoken, De Dao and the other two only felt the clear light in the hall shake for a moment, then Quan Dao and Zhang Yan disappeared, and their expressions couldn't help but become slightly serious. At this moment, Zhang Yan and the other two had already arrived at the highest point. Quan Chuan merely picked up his horsetail whisk and gave it a light sweep. Purple Arch Mountain was originally shrouded in clear light and enshrouded in auspicious clouds. However, at this moment, the lights suddenly disappeared and the mountain seemed to turn from solid to illusory. The surrounding mountains and rivers disappeared one by one, and some of the disciples who were originally stationed there also disappeared without a trace at the same time. It was like the scenery on a painting was gradually being erased, leaving behind only a blank space. Seeing this, De Ming said in a deep voice, "Since Quan Dao broke his promise first, then there is no reason for us not to fight back. Now, we can only accompany him to the end." He immediately took out a technique, and the disappearing momentum of the entire Purple K Mountain was immediately stopped, and it became real again. However, the aftermath of the collision between the two Weili sides caused the heaven and earth to shake, as if there were signs of collapse. Seeing this, Quan Dao and De Ming were worried that the power of the two sides would really shatter the present world. Quan Chuan couldn't help but say, "Fellow Zhang." Zhang Yan's eyes immediately became a little more profound. With a thought, he poured his magic power into the Tai gold bead, and in an instant, a golden light enveloped them. The magic power of both sides seemed to have hit a heavenly wall, and was restricted inside and outside of Purple K Mountain, unable to go anywhere else. Seeing this, De Ming and the other two realized that Quan Dao had come prepared. When the Tai gold bead first appeared, because the two sides had not really fought, and Zhang Yan had even used his own magic power, the three of them thought that the Tai gold bead was just an ordinary magic treasure, so they didn't take it seriously. But now, they suddenly realized that this treasure could clearly suppress the present world, and it was no wonder that Quan Dao dared to act so brazenly. Quan Dao and De Ming were greatly refreshed, because Zhang Yan really did not lie, and the magic power of the five of them was contained within it. However, they quickly noticed that something wasn't right. Everything in the surroundings had frozen. At this moment, they had a feeling that they'd jumped out of the outside world, and they weren't related to this world at all. This was because under the protection of Zhang Yan's magic power, the magic power of the five of them could no longer affect the present world. Since they could not affect it, then it was the same as completely separating them from the present world. And the Tai gold bead had originally jumped out of everything, and was only connected to the present world by a strand of consciousness. Now that its consciousness had been severed, it naturally had nowhere to go. Because all of this was completely in the hands of Zhang Yan, if he didn't let them go back, they might not be able to go back. Quan Chuan frowned and said, "Fellow Taoist, have you gone too far?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly, but didn't answer. At this point, he had already completely covered the present world with his magic power. At this moment, no matter what he did to Quan Dao or De Ming Dao, it would not alarm the true body. Quan Chuan didn't wait for his reply, and he knew that something was wrong. He wanted to break free, but he felt that the entire present world was under a strong Weili, as if a Tai gold bead had arrived, and that chi happened to coincide with Zhang Yan's. He suddenly came back to his senses, and turned to look at Zhang Yan, so all of this was planned by fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back, and said faintly, "I don't want to make things difficult for the two of you, so the two of you can leave on your own." Quan Dao and De Ming Dao understood that it was impossible for the two of them to fight against the true body of Zhang Yan. The other party could expel them with just a thought. Now that they were allowed to leave on their own, he was just giving them some face as they were of the same generation. Quan Yu bowed and sighed, "Fellow Taoist is one move ahead of us. Today, we have lost. We will discuss who is better with fellow Taoist in the future." Zhang Yan was unmoved. After he had expelled all the spirit enhancement Weili other than himself, he would be able to complete the evolution of his cultivation, and then he would be on the same level as the true body of this generation. At that time, if the other party wanted to come and discuss Dao, he would not be welcomed. After Quan Dao and De Ming Dao finished speaking, their bodies instantly dimmed, and finally, like a light smoke, they dissipated between heaven and earth. After Zhang Yan confirmed that there was no trace of the two of them in this world, he looked down at Deming Dao and the other two in Zeke Mountain, and said, "What do the three of you say?" Deming Dao seemed to know that he could not fight against him at this moment. Among the three of them, two of them bowed silently, and their bodies gradually dissipated. Obviously, they had dissipated this strand of consciousness on their own. However, only one person stood there quietly without moving. Zhang Yan raised his brows. He could sense that this person seemed to have some kind of connection with him. Now that this person was not willing to take the initiative to retreat, it was likely that he wanted to use Zhang Yan to end things. Then, if the true body obtained this mystery, it would be easier to find trouble with him in the future. He sneered, waved his sleeves, and under the endless pressure of the Weili, the other person's figure shattered like a bubble. At this moment, in this world, the consciousness of Quan Dao and Deming Dao had completely dissipated. All the foreign spirit enhancement Weili were expelled by him, and only he stayed here. At this step, according to the original plan, he should take that step and complete his freedom. However, he could feel that if he did this, perhaps the thing that the few Grand Elders were fighting for would disappear. So, he had to obtain it first, and then it would be easier to carry out the subsequent matters. With a thought, he had already returned to Forgotten Li Mountain. After that, he called Dongguang over and said, "Quan Dao and Deming Dao's Grand Elders have been expelled from this world by me. All of you can support the 11th prince to seize the throne, and make him worship my Forgotten Li Mountain as the orthodox sect."